What if I told you that some of the most iconic moments in Star Wars don't actually make sense? That the galaxy far, far away, filled with Jedi, Sith, and star-destroying battles, also hides contradictions, unanswered questions, and plot holes big enough to fly a Star Destroyer through. From Leia remembering a mother she could never have known, to the Jedi trusting an army that was designed to kill them, these aren't just nitpicks, they're the seams that hold the saga together, and sometimes threaten to pull it apart. In this video, we're going to journey through the top Star Wars plot holes and contradictions. We'll look at what fans say to defend them, where lore tries to patch the gaps, and why, in the end, the very flaws we wrestle with are what make the story unforgettable. By the time we're done, you'll never watch these movies the same way again. Before you fall asleep tonight, drop a like on this video. These deep dives take a while to make, and your support helps keep this series alive. Now, let's begin where all stories in Star Wars begin, with a prophecy and a contradiction. Before we pull at any single thread, picture the whole tapestry for just a beat, a dagger that lines up with a broken horizon as if the sea learned geometry, bombs that seem to fall in vacuum, a fleet that appears fully staffed from a planet no one can find, and a superweapon that pauses to let a moon drift aside like it's waiting its turn. Star Wars is endlessly confident about images like these, and that confidence is part of its charm. But confidence is also where the seams start to show. Which brings us to a quieter moment than all the explosions, a conversation in the woods on the forest moon of Endor, where a sister remembers a mother she could not have known. Luke asks gently, almost as if he already knows the answer, "Do you remember your mother, your real mother?" Leia does not hesitate. Just a little bit. "She died when I was very young." She offers impressions more than events, images, feelings, the sense of beauty underlined by sadness, and the scene plays with the unadorned candor of childhood recollection. Yet the prequels move that memory to a place the older film never anticipated, on Polis Massa, amid sterile light and the mechanical calm of medical droids. Padmé gives birth to twins, names them, and dies within minutes. There is simply no common span of living memory between mother and daughter. If Leia's words on Endor are literal, the timeline cannot bear their weight. Fans come forward with patches because they love the story enough to keep it whole. The gentlest is adoption. Perhaps Leia is really recalling Breha Organa, the queen of Alderaan who raised her. That reading can work around the edges, but it works against the center of the scene. Luke explicitly asks about her real mother, and Leia answers as if they both agree who that is. Others look to the Force, suggesting impressions can feel like memories, that prenatal or newborn sensitivity might retain an emotional imprint only later given language. It's a thoughtful idea and it honors Leia's power, but it raises its own questions. Why would Luke, just as strong, if not stronger, have no parallel echo to report? And why would the film frame the exchange in plain recollection rather than mystical vision? A third group argues for metaphor. Leia is speaking symbolically, the way grief turns fragments into stories. That approach honors the poetry of the moment, but it also softens the firm way the dialogue is delivered. The line reads like shared history, not shared symbolism. Canon, for its part, never pins a definitive answer to the wall. Nothing formally overwrites the scene on Endor, nothing in the films replaces Padmé's swift death, nothing in later material gives us a diegetic footnote that resolves the tension on screen. The result is a feeling many Star Wars contradictions share, not that the story is lying to us, but that two different eras of the saga told their truths in different keys. If you lean toward Breha, you preserve a human explanation but dampen the extraordinary implication that Leia's connection to her birth mother left a trace. If you lean toward the Force, you preserve wonder but accept that the film speaks like memory when it might mean vision. Either way, the scene asks us to choose which kind of honesty we prefer, emotional honesty or literal chronology. There's also a subtler layer beneath the dialogue, one about how people name things when they are trying not to say too much. Leia's very young is elastic, it could mean months, years, or, if we stretch, minutes. But the tone isn't elastic at all, it's steady, certain, and unguarded, as though she has told herself this story since childhood. And Luke's phrasing matters too. He doesn't say Padmé, because he doesn't know her name, he says real mother, because all he has is the absence where his own mother would be. The siblings are triangulating around truth with the tools they have, incomplete records, a galaxy's worth of secrecy, and the ache of questions that no one in their lives ever answered directly. When a story grows across decades and authors, these human shortcuts calcify into canon. We don't need malice or deception to create a contradiction, we only need two earnest storytellers answering different needs. In a way, that's the generous reading of this entire puzzle. Leia's memory moment preserves the mythic significance of mothers and children, the prequels preserve the operatic inevitability of tragedy. Each decision works for its film. Together, they wobble. And wobble is the texture of Star Wars when it tries to be both legend and ledger, both feeling and fact. The affection that keeps the saga bright is the same affection that invites us to test its joints. If memory can blur that easily, what happens when a Jedi chooses to blur it on purpose? It sounds like hedging, and Obi-Wan's "I don't recall ever owning a droid" is the neatest hedge in the saga. He says it with that warm half-smile, the tone of a kindly scholar who has made peace with complicated history, and for a moment it sounds perfectly reasonable. In the prequels, R2-D2 is never his property, the little astromech is attached to Queen Amidala's royal ship, then to Padmé's entourage, and finally to Anakin's starfighter. From this strictly legal angle, Kenobi is telling the truth. But truth in Star Wars is rarely only legal. The films also show him flying with R2, trusting him with missions, and addressing him like an old comrade. So is the sentence a precise statement, or is it a velvet rope across a room full of facts? The gentlest defense is cultural, a Jedi eschew attachment. They travel with droids, they rely on them, but they do not own them, at least not in the emotional sense. That posture protects the Order from possessiveness, and it fits Kenobi's temperament. Yet the line is delivered not as philosophy but as biography, a reply to Luke about a particular droid in his hut on Tatooine. If the point was monastic distance, why not explain the principle? Why not say Jedi don't own droids, instead of choosing language that sidesteps history while seeming to address it? The staging suggests something else, a man choosing his words the way a fencer chooses a guard, inviting one conclusion while defending another. Practical danger sharpens the point. At the moment Kenobi speaks, Imperial stormtroopers are combing the desert for stolen plans. Claiming familiarity, let alone ownership, could entangle Luke in a conspiracy he isn't ready to understand. Denial protects them both. In that light, the line becomes fieldcraft. Keep the circle of knowledge small until necessity expands it. But the film undercuts even this tidy reading with Kenobi's behavior minutes later. He listens to Leia's message, addresses R2 as "my little friend," and slips gracefully back into the old alliance. If this is a cover story, it's a fragile one. If it's the truth, it bends under the weight of the next scene. C-3PO complicates matters further. Owen Lars meets a prissy protocol droid at his door in A New Hope and treats him like an appliance. What languages? What cost? No, not that one. We need a translator. In Attack of the Clones, however, we see Owen and 3PO sharing the same homestead years earlier. The fan patches here are many, each plausible in isolation. Droids of that model are ubiquitous. One gold protocol unit looks very much like another. 3PO's plating changed from exposed parts and dull casings to polished gold with a silver shin. He received a total memory wipe at the end of Revenge of the Sith. Nearly 2 decades have passed in a house that cycles droids like moisture filters. Any one of those could explain a blank look. Yet the irony is thick. Owen reacts to Obi-Wan's name with immediate, defensive familiarity, that wizard's just a crazy old man, but shows no flicker at the droid who once scuttled around his courtyard. Recognition seems to work exactly where he does not want it to. Which raises a harder possibility, and a more characterful one. Maybe Owen is pretending not to remember. If anything in his orbit hints at the Skywalker problem, he swats it down. He lies by omission to Luke about his father, discourages him from the academy, and keeps him glued to the farm long after his peers leave. Why wouldn't he smooth over a droid-shaped wrinkle if it prevents dangerous questions? That reading honors the text we have without asking Owen to be foolish. It paints him as a man doing quiet triage on a family secret. But like Kenneby's hedge, it depends on silence, and silence rarely holds in this story. And here I'd like to know what you think. Was Owen being willfully blind, or carefully protective? Drop your take in the comments. I'd love to see how you read his role. There is an elegance, too, in how these two men mirror each other. One finesses the past to protect a boy from destiny, the other suppresses the past to protect a boy from danger. Between them stands R2-D2, the only major character who remembers everything, memory unreformatted, loyalty undented. Bail Organa orders 3PO wiped, no one wipes R2. This asymmetry is almost symbolic, the storyteller's tool who keeps the through line intact, the witness who carries the secret forward until the moment it must be revealed. If you accept that symbolism, Kenneby's line turns into a narrative courtesy, a way of letting the witness speak first while the guardian feigns ignorance just long enough for the audience to catch up. Still, the line grates because Star Wars has already taught us to hear hedges as alarms. From a certain point of view, Kenneby will later say when Luke learns the truth about his father, and the phrase lands like a graceful dodge over a chasm. He is not malicious, he is managing frames. But when the saga begins to lean on careful wording to bridge contradictions born of decades of filmmaking, the viewer feels the hand on the tiller more than the tide. In a galaxy where machines talk and feelings travel faster than ships, who is responsible for seeing what is in front of them and naming it clearly? When people misread the obvious in front of them, we shouldn't be surprised when a Sith Lord does the same. And yet it is surprising, because Vader can feel a mentor across corridors but not the defiance of his own daughter. On the Death Star he halts mid-stride, the air tightening around him as he murmurs, "I sense something, a presence I've not felt since." Obi-Wan has stepped into the same station and the Force rings like a struck bell. Later, in the trench, a nameless pilot threads a shot and Vader, sight blocked, readouts humming, says simply, "The Force is strong with this one." He can feel a teacher, he can feel a student. Then why not the princess he interrogates in a locked room, close enough to hear her breath through the fear and the fury? The first defense is the neatest: Leia isn't trained. She's a senator, a spy, a soldier, she's not meditating or reaching outward. The Force, after all, is not omniscience, it's a current, and people who don't swim in it won't leave the same wake. The trouble is the trench run. Luke isn't trained either, not really, he's a talented pilot with a few lessons and a voice in his head, and Vader still senses him. If untrained presence can ring loudly in combat, why does Leia's iron will ring so softly under interrogation? Perhaps, comes the second defense, training isn't the variable, intent is. Luke is actively opening himself to the Force at Ben's urging, while Leia is clamping down, mind like a locked safe. That distinction does real work, but it buckles in The Empire Strikes Back, where Vader tortures Leia on Cloud City and still never speaks of sensing kinship. She isn't in Jedi mode there either, but the pain is acute, the emotion volcanic. Wouldn't a father's attunement crackle at least a little? Then there's the darker, more human possibility: Vader can't see what he refuses to imagine. He believed Anakin Skywalker died with his child, he has arranged his whole self around that loss, and expectation is the mind's strongest filter. We know he's capable of missing what love puts right in front of him. He lives that failure in the prequels. If the Force amplifies what a person brings to it, what does a man bring who has bricked over his past and welded the door shut? Add to that a third, more technical explanation: Leia's resistance is political before it's mystical. She has spent a lifetime in rooms where information is currency and attention is a weapon. She regulates her face, her tone, her body's tells. Perhaps she unconsciously regulates her presence, too, presenting blankness to an interrogator who expects either panic or surrender. Wouldn't that kind of discipline read to the Force the way a heatless object reads to an infrared sensor, hard to track unless you're already looking for it? Canon itself complicates the picture in a way that helps and hurts. Between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, Vader learns the surname of the pilot who destroyed the Death Star. Suddenly the universe of possibilities narrows to a single obsession. He hunts Luke, not the children, because Luke exists now as a fact in his mind. In Return of the Jedi he senses Luke on Endor when Luke's emotions flare. Only during the duel, when the possibility of a sister erupts in Luke's thoughts, does Vader pivot and say the word aloud. The films thus offer a pattern. Vader detects what is active, focused, and already framed by his intent. Leia is none of those things in his mind until Luke makes her so, and by then the story has a different rendezvous in mind. All of that is to say the patchwork can hold, if you are comfortable letting psychology carry more weight than power levels. If you need the Force to be a scan that pings the whole room reliably, the scenes will always jar. If you accept the Force as a language that answers the question asked, the asymmetry softens. Still, the cumulative impression is that the Empire prefers instruments to instincts. Vader chokes a man with a gesture, but he wheels in a droid to extract answers. He could probe, instead he doses. He could listen, instead he measures. And when a regime builds its habits around screens and readouts, how many truths walk past in plain sight, unregistered because they don't match the template? If the Empire overlooks the truth in people, no wonder it overlooks the threat inside an empty metal capsule. Because when an empty escape pod launches, someone decides it's cheaper to ignore it. On the Devastator's bridge the readouts are clean, the targeting scopes draw their quiet circles, and a gunner does what doctrine has trained him to do: he checks for organics. Hold your fire. There are no life forms aboard. In a navy that moves planets with intimidation, the call sounds routine, even prudent. Escape pods are meant for people, sensors are tuned to find people, no people means no priority target. The decision lasts only a breath, just long enough for one small capsule to fall toward Tatooine with the future sealed inside. If you love procedure, the scene feels almost reasonable. If you love outcomes, it feels like a hinge the Empire never noticed turning. Fans bring thoughtful patches, each trying to turn that hinge back. One says the crew is conserving fire and attention in a cluttered battle space. Turbo laser shots are not ammunition in the traditional sense, but power and heat still need managing, and chasing every scrap of jettisoned metal is poor discipline. Another says discretion is tactical. A blast near a neutral world risks witnesses, wreckage, and questions. A third reframes the choice as calculated recovery. If stolen data might be aboard, destroying the pod is the worst option, so you track the trajectory and send troops, which, after all, the Empire does, combing dunes for droids within hours. Each explanation adds a plank to the bridge, yet the bridge still sways, because the spoken line doesn't signal caution, it signals dismissal. It must have been a malfunction. That's not a retrieval plan. That's a shrug. And the shrug is the point. In a galaxy where droids are couriers, saboteurs, and soldiers, why is no life forms the decisive filter? Imperial doctrine trusts instruments over imagination. Life sign scans gate shots. A captured freighter gets a scanning crew rather than a boarding overwatch. Probe droids are deployed when the target is already suspected. not because the Empire expects cleverness from what it calls objects. The story keeps showing us the mindset. The Falcon is empty enough to be routine, so men stroll aboard and vanish into a smuggler's trap. A pod is empty enough to be a mistake, so a gunner saves a bolt and loses a rebellion. If the Force in this universe amplifies what you already attend to, Imperial censors do the opposite, occluding anything that doesn't fit a template. What else can slip through that template? Anything that looks boring until it isn't. The best defense, then, shifts from technology to psychology. The Empire is arrogant by design. It believes threats announce themselves. Leia announces herself. Rebel fleets announce themselves. A pod without a heartbeat does not. You can even argue the choice is thematically right. Evil underestimates the humble. But theme is not SOP, and the line still reads like a policy failure masquerading as efficiency. Would a competent Navy really base shoot-don't shoot on a single sensor class when ubiquitous droids can carry data cores, explosives, or trackers? Would a command staff that just captured a consular ship really assume a jettison pod is nobody's idea? The Devastator corrects course within the hour by following the crashed site, yet the correction only proves the initial criterion was wrong. First a shrug, then a scramble. If the Empire's blind spot were limited to a gunner's scope, perhaps it would end here, a single lapse buried in a vast machine. But the machine keeps preferring procedure to anticipation. It prefers clean readings to messy probabilities, preferred doctrine to ugly contingencies, and that preference scales upward from a turret to a superweapon. That same blend of arrogance and procedure resurfaces when a battle station literally waits for a planet to get out of the way. The Death Star doesn't sprint, it orbits, and that orbit buys the rebels time over Yavin. We watch the countdown tick like a metronome of doom, the super laser crews reporting readiness, range officers calling out intervals, the green-lit dish holding its breath while the battle station eases around a gas giant to get line of sight on a jungle moon. On paper, this is tidy physics. Yavin for circles Yavin Prime. The target is occluded until geometry cooperates. The super laser needs a clear path. The image carries weight because it feels because orbital mechanics are patient and implacable. And yet the patience that sells the scene is the patience that breaks it. A terror weapon, built to end wars in a single shot, chooses to wait while an enemy colony of starfighters has just enough minutes to plan, launch, and improvise a miracle. Defenses arrive quickly and, at first glance, convincingly. One insists the approach vector was a constraint, not a choice. The Devastator's tracker on the Millennium Falcon delivered coordinates, but gravity wells and mass shadows make hyperspace reversion near a gas giant dangerous. You can't simply pop out anywhere you like without risking a misjump. In that telling, the Death Star exits at a safe, predictable point and then must circle sublight to achieve a firing solution. Another defense doubles down on the weapon's design. The superlaser's focusing arrays have limited gimbal. The beam must be aligned through the station's dish, and while the station can yaw and pitch, the cleanest, safest solution is orbital clearance rather than a tortured angle through dense gravitation. A third defense is doctrinal. Tarkin wants the demonstration to be unmistakable, the base erased without collateral errors that a misaimed shot might cause. He believes the rebel pilots cannot meaningfully threaten his platform before the window opens. Evacuate? In our moment of triumph, is not a joke in universe, it is a thesis. But each patch leaves threads exposed. If mass shadows make close-in reversion risky, why not arrive earlier on the far side, pre-positioned for the moon's next appearance? If micro jumps near gravity wells are imprecise, why not insert a screening force of star destroyers hours ahead to bracket the moon and attrit any launch while the station closes? If the dish can't angle much, why not select an arrival vector that anticipates the moon's orbital motion so the shot comes up faster? The Empire is not stumbling into the Yavin system blind, it has chosen to track the Falcon, to allow escape precisely to discover this base, and presumably to think about what follows. Even a conservative naval plan would have asked simple questions. Where will the target be in 1 hour, 2, 3, and where should our guns be to meet it? Scale complicates the just blow up the planet suggestion, and it should. The Death Star has demonstrated it can disassemble an Earth-like world, but Yavin Prime is a deep well of gas and gravity. Would the energy budget change? Would detonation create shock fronts, debris, or gravitational turbulence that threaten the station at close range? The film does not say, but prudence would. Even then, the question persists: if destroying the planet is unwise, why is arriving on the wrong side wise? The station's sublight engines are vast, with hours of lead time. A different vector was possible. That they did not take it is not a failure of physics, it is a failure of anticipation. What the film quietly shows, and what the story keeps confirming, is that the Empire's problem is not capability but posture. Turbo lasers optimized for capital ships can't track nimble X-wings, gunners waiting for life forms miss payloads traveling by machine, admirals trained in blockade and bombardment underestimate pilots trained in audacity. Tarkin's doctrine is fear through decisive overmatch. It breeds contempt for low-mass threats and rewards clock-like procedure over ugly contingency. The Death Star's clock tells him the moon will be in range, his doctrine tells him that is enough. But doctrine cannot see the torpedo it taught itself to ignore. Misread people, misread machines, misread windows, each mistake opens room for the next. Because the exhaust port was not an accident of design alone. It was a weakness someone hid in plain sight. The briefing on Yavin is disarmingly simple: a small thermal exhaust port, 2 meters wide, right below the main port, with a shaft that leads directly to the reactor system. A precise hit will start a chain reaction. The room murmurs at the audacity of it. That's impossible, even for a computer. One pilot objects, and the scene becomes the franchise's central dare. Can nerve, instinct, and a little faith accomplish what calculation insists cannot be done? We watch Luke holster the computer, hear the whisper of tutelage, and see the torpedoes bend toward a target that looks, on the schematic, like a glorified maintenance vent. In the original telling, the Death Star's undoing feels like a miracle the Empire never imagined. In the modern canon, Rogue One repositions that miracle as a message from inside the machine. Galen Erso's confession to his daughter reframes the question. The reactor's vulnerability is sabotage engineered under duress, a flaw woven into the lattice of a superweapon so vast that its own scale becomes cover. This retcon is elegant. It explains why a station built by paranoid men for a paranoid regime would contain a single catastrophic pathway. It honors the texture of tyranny, overconfident, top-down, hostile to dissent, and turns an implausible oversight into an act of courage that required both genius and patience. Yet even this careful fix opens new angles. If the flaw rides the architecture from exhaust port to core, why are there no bafflers or interrupts along the shaft to starve a pressure wave or disrupt a propagation path? If the Empire's engineers can array planetary shields and hyperlane interdictors, why is a reactor's thermal egress not compartmentalized by default? Sabotage justifies a vulnerability, it does not justify an absence of redundancy. Fan defenses meet those questions head-on. One says the port can't simply be sealed or overshielded, heat has to go somewhere, and the station's own geometry channels waste away from sensitive arrays. In that telling, you can add grates, screens, and angle changes, but every impedance threatens back pressure the reactor can't tolerate. Another points to shield typology. Deflectors in this universe divide into ray shields and particle shields. The trench is bristling with guns and armored plating, but the thermal shaft is protected against energy fire, not against a self-propelled torpedo that can fly around the shield envelope and then down a physical conduit. The films hint at this by requiring torpedoes rather than lasers and by having the munitions curve after release. A third defense invokes doctrine again. Tarkin's aim isn't to eliminate every edge case, it's to demonstrate a weapon whose fear factor already feels absolute. When your goal is terror, you assume no one will solve your puzzle in time. And yet the trench itself invites doubt. Why is a critical vulnerability reachable by an approach vector that channels attacking fighters into a long, straight run like a range? We see turbo laser emplacements elevated on towers, tracking sluggishly as nimble craft dip in and out of their arcs. We see ties scrambled too late, assigned in pairs that cannot overwhelm a wedge of X-wings at once. We see, crucially, that the defenders are calibrated for ship-to-ship duels, not for surgical denial of a single aperture. Fan patches note that the port's placement in a service trench keeps maintenance crews and heat exchanges away from other sensitive systems, that heavy guns elevated above the trench protect a broader perimeter, and that the Empire does not expect one-man craft to pose existential threats to capital hardware. The film itself says as much. They don't consider a small one-man fighter to be any threat, or they'd have a tighter defense. That line, however, is an indictment as much as an explanation. If the port is known to be a necessary liability, then the logic of defense should flow toward it, not away. Rogue One's addition clarifies motive but also magnifies a managerial failure. Krennic wants credit, Tarkin wants results, Vader wants order. In that triangle, who signs off on independent audits? Who invites third-party review when the chief architect is a prisoner, the project is classified, and the schedule is a cudgel? Erso's design succeeds not only because he hid a flaw, but because the culture above him punished curiosity and prized tempo. Even an Imperial lieutenant who suspected a pattern of small tolerances might hesitate to escalate, knowing that such a report sounds like heresy in the Church of Tarkin. So the weakness persists, and the rebels, given just enough time by the station's own orbital patience, find it, fly it, and thread it. Could the Empire have patched the problem in the interval between Scarif and Yavin? The story suggests not. The data is exfiltrated under fire, the station is already operational, and the chain of command is feuding even as it deploys. Engineering cycles on something this big aren't measured in days. You don't refactor a reactor. But even that pragmatic constraint leaves us with optics that rankle, the superweapon that can scribe a world to ashes defeated by a shot precisely nobody should be allowed to take. The sense of imbalance is part of the myth, yes, but it is also the signature of a doctrine that taught its gunners to trust the big picture so thoroughly they neglected the aperture in the frame. And that is why the fix, sabotage, answers the heart of the complaint while preserving its edge. The Death Star is not foolish, it is brittle where brittle thinking made it so. The machine could have survived a miracle if its keepers had respected the possibility of one. If the machine's defenses are brittle, surely its soldiers can compensate, unless their myth outruns their marksmanship. Only Imperial stormtroopers are so precise, says Ben, and the movies proceed to contradict him. He's crouched by the gutted sandcrawler, reading the scorched metal like a crime scene analyst, and his conclusion carries the weight of a veteran. Tusken Raiders fire wildly, these shots are grouped, the victims were cut down with method. If we stop there, the line works as expert testimony and foreshadowing, precision as the Empire's calling card. But the saga doesn't stop there. We step from the sandcrawler to corridors where white armor fills the frame, bolts stitch the air, and our heroes sprint through a storm of red without consequence. Do these troopers miss because they're incompetent, or because the story is herding our protagonists through safely? Fans split the difference with a series of careful patches, and each one helps until the aggregate still feels like an argument with the screen. The strongest defense starts where Kenobi does, context. On the Tantive 4, stormtroopers breach and sweep a choke point, trading a handful of losses for swift control. They are brutal and effective. On Tatooine, the Sandcrawler Massacre and the Lars Homestead show ruthless thoroughness. In Rogue One, squad-level tactics look credible: short bounds, suppressive fire, clean room entries. In other words, when the mission is overwhelm and occupy, the aim appears, if not surgical, then convincingly competent. The trouble comes when named characters enter the frame. In the Death Star firefights, troopers frequently fire on the move at long range with poor angles through smoke and machinery. A real doctrinal answer would be, don't do that. Set ambushes. Layer fields of fire. Her to kill zones. The film nods toward this with the let them escape gambit. Vader and Tarkin track the Falcon, so the garrison emisses to channel the quarry. That patch is canon, and it heals a lot of wounds in A New Hope. It does not heal Ender. Ender is where credibility strains. Scout troopers collide with logs and whips, line troopers struggle in forest fighting that should favor them once they reset perimeters and call heavier support. Fan defenses here emphasize asymmetry. The garrison is light, overconfident, and initially under orders to capture rather than obliterate because an Imperial shield generator next door is not a place to saturate with explosives. Ewok traps are surprisingly lethal, rolling logs against brittle walker ankles, rope trip lines that exploit high centers of gravity, deadfalls that don't care about armor plating. That matters. So does the Rebel Strike Team's role. It's not Ewoks alone. It's combined arms with Han and Leia detonating charges and Chewbacca seizing an AT-ST to turn the local firepower. Even so, the wide shots tell a different story. Protagonists sprint across open ground while volleys stitch trees around them, and dozens of white-helmeted marksmen fail to land decisive hits. At that point the patch moves from tactics to metaphysics. The Force, even uninvoked, bends probability. Luke and Leia are not ordinary targets. Han's luck often reads like a current he rides. If we accept that, missing becomes part of the myth, near misses as a signature of destiny. Armor and equipment complicate the picture. Plastoid suits are built for shrapnel, heat, and environment rather than guaranteed immunity to direct blaster bolts. Kinetic impacts can concuss, which is why stones and logs can stun even when bolts sometimes glance. Helmets trade peripheral vision for protection and HUD data. A design choice that looks militarily plausible also explains on-screen tunnel vision. The E11 blaster is a compact carbine, versatile but not inherently high precision under sustained fire, especially for conscripts. And that last word points to another in-universe fissure. By the original trilogy era the Empire leans more on recruits than on Kamino and clones. Training varies, morale varies, and elite units are intermingled with garrison troops who have rarely faced peer adversaries. Compare that to the sharp work of clone troopers in the prequels: tight formations, disciplined volleys, consistent marksmanship. The precise reputation Obi-Wan references may be as much about the legacy of the Grand Army as it is about the Stormtrooper Corps that replaced it. Even so, specific scenes resist every fix. On the Death Star, troopers pour fire into a narrow hangar bay catwalk and miss at ranges where even hurried shots should score more often. On Bespin, squads with overlapping lanes fail to pin Han and Leia. You can argue, rightly, that the camera selects for survivals because the dead heroes don't get sequels, but selective camera is not an in-universe argument, it's a meta one. Inside the fiction, the best synthesis is this: stormtroopers are not clowns, but they are instruments of a doctrine that prefers intimidation and massed force to patient small unit excellence. They excel when the corridor is theirs and the objective is brute control. They struggle when the fight narrows to a handful of shots against protagonists the Force will not let go. That reading preserves Kennedy's forensic insight without pretending every subsequent frame must obey it like physics. And there is a final irony in Ben's line. He is vouching for Imperial precision to prove a point, that the massacre could not be Tusken work, while standing in front of evidence of Imperial overreach. The Empire is precise where it is easy to be precise. At a scene it has time to stage, with targets that cannot shoot back. When variables multiply, precision gives way to procedure, and procedure fails against audacity. Which is why, in the middle of inconsistent aim and institutional swagger, the saga's most improbable marksman steps forward. Yet skill can surge quickly in this galaxy, especially for a certain farm boy. Luke moves from moisture vaporators to starfighter ace and Jedi aspirant with breathtaking speed. One day he's complaining about power converters, the next his Red 5, threading a 2-meter solution into the heart of a planet killer after turning off the very computer designed to help him do it. The case for plausibility begins well before Yavin. He's already a skilled T-16 Skyhopper pilot, bullseyeing wump rats in Beggar's Canyon at roughly the same scale as the exhaust port. Biggs vouches for him, R2 gives him a competent astromech partner, and the rebellion, bled for pilots, is inclined to take chances on talent. Add the Force, a mentor's voice in the headset, a decision to trust instinct over telemetry, and the impossible shot starts to feel narratively earned. The complaint is not really that Luke succeeds, it's how quickly the story stacks those successes. If your first combat mission ends with the largest explosion in the franchise, what even counts as a next rung on the ladder? The film-to-film climb is where the vertigo sets in. In The Empire Strikes Back, Luke is levitating equipment, sensing visions, and sparring with a Sith Lord. Fan defenses here are strong on paper. Time passes between films, measured in campaigns we don't see. Dagobah may last weeks, perhaps longer. Han and Leia, stuck without a working hyperdrive, are effectively crawling sublight toward Bespin, which stretches their thread of the story while Luke's training fills the gap. Yoda is an accelerant. He compresses fundamentals for an adult learner with a rare, volatile gift. Even so, the edit undercuts the calendar. The cross-cutting makes Luke's apprenticeship feel like a handful of damp mornings and one cave, then suddenly he's in a duel that ends with a scream and a fall. The simplest answer is also the most satisfying thematically. Vader is toying with him, and Luke loses decisively. But losing decisively while surviving a duel with the saga's apex predator is still an extraordinary middle chapter for a student who just put down his first training remote. By Return of the Jedi, the slope steepens again. Black robes, calm voice, a green blade he built himself, a mind trick at Jabba's gate, the steadiness to face Vader once more. Fans patch the jump with wartime context and rite of passage detail. Assembling a lightsaber implies crystal attunement and discipline. Correspondence with Force ghosts can substitute for a living master, necessity shortcut ceremony. It all tracks, and yet the contrast with the prequel era's years-long Padawan path will always scrape at the edges. The Order once raised children into knighthood. Luke is a young man racing through the syllabus in crisis. Perhaps that is the point. When myth returns, it returns fast. The Force does not grade on a curve, it looks for willingness and pays out in moments rather than semesters. Still, the viewer's ear hears the drumbeat quicken and starts to question timing itself. If progression can compress this dramatically, if cause and effect can sprint to stay ahead of danger, what else in this galaxy is moving faster than the instruments that measure it? And when speed itself is suspect, even our units of speed start to bend. Enter the Kessel run in 12 parsecs, a boast about distance sold as a boast about speed. Han drops the line in the cantina with a smuggler's grin, and for decades it sounded like showy nonsense. A parsec is a unit of length, not time, so why would a pilot use it to brag about how fast his ship is? The modern canon bends the line into shape by bending the route itself. In Solo, the Kessel run isn't a stopwatch race, it's a needle thread through the Acadi's maelstrom and the Moore's gravity well, where cautious navigators give the black holes a respectful berth and accept a longer path. Han doesn't run it faster, he runs it shorter, skirting so close to annihilation that the Falcon's nav computer, augmented by L337 star charts, and a hyperfuel gamble are all that keep the ship from stretching into spaghetti. The boast becomes navigational bravado, fewer parsecs traveled because you dared the dangerous straight line. On paper, that retcon sings. Real pilots brag about shaving miles off a course, not just minutes off a time. The Falcon's speed is really a composite of processor, hull nerve, and pilot audacity. The film even leans into the messiness of legend, 12 parsecs, Han crows, and when Chewie growls a correction, he fires back, not. If you round down. That's exactly how a tall tale hardens, close enough to be true, polished enough to be marketable. Fan defenses fill in the gaps with satisfying detail. Hyperdrive math in this galaxy is hostage to mass shadows. Better nav data lets you plot riskier micro jumps and cut distance safely. L3's upload gives the Falcon a brain no rival freighter has. Unrefined coaxium buys a ludicrous burst of thrust exactly when the maelstrom's tides want to tear the ship apart. It's lest we go fast than we go where others don't dare, and that certainly feels like something worth bragging about. And yet, a good fix doesn't erase the original wobble. In A New Hope, the boast is presented to rubes who would reasonably equate fastest ship with shortest time. Obi-Wan's skeptical face reads, beautifully, as a man who knows the difference between speed and salesmanship, and many fans still prefer the simplest patch of all, Han is conning them. Of course he chooses a jargon-laced metric that sounds impressive whether or not his audience understands it. The problem isn't that this reading fails, it's that later films encourage us to take the number literally. Rey repeats the legend in The Force Awakens, botching it as 14 parsecs and getting corrected, which suggests the figure itself, not just the spin, has become canon inside the canon. If it's pure puffery, why is the number fixed in cultural memory? If it's pure precision, why is it still delivered as a speed brag to people who aren't asking about route geometry? There's also the physics of story question that never quite goes away. If shorter path equals shorter time, then calling the Falcon a fast is fine in practice, but the ship's brag bleeds into the pilot's brag into the navigator's brag, and we're left untangling which part the parsecs actually measure. You can shave distance with a plodding freighter if your route is bold. You can cover the long way quickly with a monster drive, the Falcon claims both, and that overdetermination is what makes the line continue to itch. Even Solo's elegant repair asks us to accept that one movie meant distance all along while another very clearly played it like velocity. Do we mind? Only if we demand that every myth's first draft speak the same dialect as its footnotes. Many of us don't. We enjoy the way the saga writes glosses into itself as it grows. So the Kessel run becomes a neat emblem of Star Wars problem solving. Don't erase the boast, reframe the course, don't call it wrong, call it specialized knowledge. It's clever, it's affectionate, and it preserves Han as exactly what he is, a pilot who makes maps flinch. And if a clever path can fell giants, Ender proves that small hands can topple armor. Because logs, leverage, and local knowledge turn furry insurgents into kingmakers. The Ender engagement begins like a parable about asymmetry. A strike team tiptoes into hostile woods, a garrison guards a shield generator vital to the Empire's most ambitious project, and a native population, dismissed as quaint, watches both with bright, curious eyes. What happens next has always split viewers. Some see a fairy tale where slings and courage conquer armor. Others see a tactics lesson written in bark and stone. The truth sits between those readings. Ewoks do not outshoot the Empire, they outprepare the ground the Empire is standing on. Start with terrain. The forest moon bends technology. Lines of sight shrink, radio becomes spotty, vehicles designed for open fields and city streets stumble over roots and ruts. At St. Walkers, terrifying in plazas and clear-cuts, have high centers of gravity and vulnerable ankle joints. Deadfalls and paired battering logs don't care about shielding or plating, they care about momentum and leverage. Ewoks fight at the scale the machines can't adjust to. Underfoot, from above, at the blind angles of a view slit. Add numbers and coordination and the geometry shifts. Nets neutralize rifles by stealing posture. Trip lines convert speed into spills. Horn signals thread the treetops faster than Imperial squads can reform. None of that is mystical, it's the difference between bringing a parade ground doctrine to a booby-trapped jungle and bringing a booby-trapped jungle to a parade ground doctrine. Now layer intent. The bunker is a do-not-destroy asset. If you're the garrison commander, you can't saturate the perimeter with heavy explosives or indiscriminate fire without risking the very generator you're sworn to protect. Your first orders are hold and capture, not erase. That constraint narrows your toolkit at the worst possible moment, because the Ewoks are free to improvise and the rebels are there to detonate. The fight you want, set-piece volleys in clean lanes, never materializes. Instead, your scouts get peeled off by snares, your formations fracture around trees, and your lines of fire, which look tidy on a map, are now clogged with friendlies, civilians, and obstacles the size of speeder bikes. How many times can you reset a perimeter when the perimeter itself keeps moving? Fans bring strong defenses to reconcile the outcome. One emphasizes overconfidence, the Emperor calls it an entire legion of my best troops, which reads like bravado designed to bait the rebels into committing everything. Another notes mission phasing, the on-screen squads at the bunker are a slice of the larger force, the rest are arrayed elsewhere and never converge in time because the space battle above turns priority and comms into chaos. A third stresses combined arms on the rebel side. This is not Ewoks versus the Empire in a vacuum. Han and Leia plant charges, Chewbacca and 2 Ewoks hijack an AT-ST and flip local firepower. The timing of those blasts dismantles the shield at the exact moment the fleet needs the opening. All of this helps. And yet the image persists, dozens of white armored soldiers missing at close range while protagonists dash through crossed fields of fire, walkers felled by traps that, one imagines, a cautious advance or a mine-clearing sweep might have spotted. If these are the Emperor's best, why do they look surprised by gravity? There's a humane answer that keeps the story honest. Best in the Empire is not best for this. Elite shock troops trained for intimidation and corridor control are not automatically elite at counterinsurgency in dense forest. They arrive expecting to dominate with speed and fear. They meet a population that neither flees nor freezes. The Ewoks don't contest the Empire's strengths, they refuse to fight where those strengths matter. They attack the joints of the machine, literally and figuratively, and let the machine's mass do the rest. Is it implausible that stones and logs can concuss through plastoid armor? Not if that armor is built to deflect heat and fragmentation rather than absorb blunt trauma. Kinetic force transmits, and bodies topple. Is it implausible that a low-tech army can seize a high-tech vehicle? Not when high cabs and narrow hatches leave crews exposed on bad footing and the boarders know the terrain down to the sap. The real fracture line, then, is not tech level but posture. The Empire trusts doctrine to solve unknowns, the Ewoks trust curiosity to create them. Imperials aim center mass, Ewoks aim for ankles, axles, and attention. The garrison expects to be obeyed, the forest refuses. And the rebels, who understand both worlds, stitch them together. A distraction becomes an ambush becomes a vehicle capture, the capture becomes the lever that pries the bunker open. If Ender feels like a fairy tale, it's because fairy tales remember something wars sometimes forget. That power is brittle when it can't imagine being small. From designed flaws to folk victories, reputation keeps colliding with reality. And no reputation takes a harder fall than the galaxy's most feared bounty hunter. We've just watched a chain of mismatches, saboteurs hiding a flaw in plain sight, soldiers praised for precision missing when it matters, a farm boy ascending faster than any syllabus allows, a boast repaired by root geometry, and a forest that turns machines into liabilities. Each moment puts reputation under stress until the image and the outcome pull apart. Fearsome machines prove brittle, fearsome doctrines prove blinkered, fearsome garrisons prove unprepared for sticks and gravity. When image and outcome separate, tone sneaks in to decide what the audience feels. Tone is the trapdoor under Boba Fett. One jetpack misfire, one blind swing, and the legend plummets into a sarlacc. In Return of the Jedi, the sequence plays as chaotic comedy. Luke carving through guards on the sail barge, Han half-blind on the skiff, a panicked shout of Boba Fett, and then the fateful jab into the bounty hunter's rocket pack. A sputter, a scream, a hull impact, and the Dune Sea swallows him whole. For a character who entered the stage as a spectre, minimal dialogue, cross-armed menace, the only hunter in a lineup willing to talk back to Vader, this exit feels like a banana peel on the palace steps. That dissonance is the heart of the complaint. How does a reputation burn so bright and then wink out in a gag? The strongest defense begins in The Empire Strikes Back, where the reputation is actually earned. Fett doesn't outgun Solo, he outthinks him. When the Falcon clings to a Star Destroyer's tower to evade sensors, Fett anticipates the trick, watches for debris release, and follows the cast-off garbage to Bespin. He tracks, he predicts, he arrives first. On Cloud City he stands at Vader's shoulder like a subcontractor who knows exactly how ugly payment can get, and he makes his one request with flinty pragmatism, no disintegrations. That's not bluster, it's a man reminding a Dark Lord that a body you can't identify won't cash. This is professional competence rendered in small, hard gestures. Even on Tatooine, as the skirmish opens, he moves like a problem solver, wrist cable flung to bind Luke, blaster up and ready, eyes on the priority target. Nothing in those beats suggests a fool. So what breaks? Tone, mostly, and battlefield chaos. The skiff fight is a swirl of misaligned priorities and bad footing. Han is blind, Chewbacca is shouting corrections, Luke is a blur, and the choreography reads like a stack of near misses engineered for momentum rather than menace. Under those conditions, a rocket pack is both an advantage and a hazard. The pack's control studs sit exposed. A strike to the housing can trigger a short and a runaway thrust. Fans point to in-universe vulnerabilities dating back to Jango's kit, to Legends-era notes about temperamental jets, to the simple fact that a melee staff wedged into a thruster is a recipe for disaster. The patch is straightforward. This is what happens when a specialist's gear meets a generalist's chaos. Fett had seconds to adjust, and the wrong impact erased those seconds. Another defense leans into perspective. Jedi is a caper rescue with swashbuckling energy, its sail barge sequence is scored and staged for exuberance. In a scene calibrated for a heroic romp, everyone not named Luke, Leia, Han, or Chewbacca becomes percussion. That doesn't mean Fett lacks skill, it means the film changes the music. If you're willing to let genre set outcomes, The Fall is franchised slapstick, not a referendum on competence. But that answer, while honest about filmmaking, isn't wholly satisfying inside the story. Even in comedy, consequences should respect the reputation the story itself built. If a single glancing blow can void a career, what was the career built on? Canon after the original trilogy tries to square the circle by separating competence from outcome and then returning to the outcome later. The Mandalorian shows us a survivor scarred and efficient, carving through stormtroopers at close quarters, bargaining with measured authority, reclaiming armor that reads as a second skin. The Book of Boba Fett reframes the man as a leader reshaped by captivity and rescued by community, less a lone predator than a tempered patriarch. For many fans, this rehabilitation works. The mystique is not just restored but matured. For others, the tonal dial swings too far toward patience and ritual, diffusing the flinty edge that once made his silhouette a threat. You can feel the tug of war. Is the point that he was always ruthless and remained so, or that he learned another kind of power and chose it? Both can be true, and the tension between them is more interesting than either extreme. There's also a narrower, craft-level reconciliation worth naming. In Empire, Fett's victories are cognitive, anticipate, shadow, corner. In Jedi, his failure is kinetic, a crowded melee with variables no contract anticipates. When you measure a hunter by the wrong metric, you'll misread the result. A chess player stumbling on a slick floor is still a chess player. Yet the critique doesn't vanish, because reputation in Star Wars is not just competence, it's aura. Aura is fragile. One gag can puncture it, and once punctured, later stories must either pretend the hole isn't there or stitch around it in full view. The newer canon stitches with respect. It lets us see the hole, then shows us the man who climbed out of it, literally, in the Dune Sea, and figuratively, in 𝒍𝒆𝒑. So does the legend survive the stumble? It does, but with a seam, and perhaps that is the honest outcome for a saga that keeps letting tone choose whose myths get to be unbroken. Fett's fall isn't an indictment of all that came before, it's a reminder that power, reputational or otherwise, depends on the frame. In a heist frame, he's a shark. In a romp, he's flotsam. The later series return him to deep water and let him circle again, slower, older, and no less dangerous for having nearly dissolved. Tone whiplash hurts most when tragedy should feel inevitable. Padmé dies with medical droids baffled, and the diagnosis reads like poetry, not medicine. In the bright sterility of polis massa, instruments hum, twins cry, and the droid's verdict slides across the moment like a caption, she has lost the will to live. The camera insists on two incompatible truths at once, mother healthy, children healthy, outcome terminal. As storytelling, it aims for myth. A life so bound to love that when love shatters, the body follows. As diegesis, it asks us to accept that the galaxy's finest obstetrics cannot find a physical cause in a patient who, hours earlier, suffered a force choke severe enough to drop her to the landing pad. If this is a fairy tale, the line is tragic grace. If this is a galaxy with trauma bays and Bacta, the line is a glitching readout wearing a halo. Fans patch diligently because they want both the grace and the rigor. The most humane fix reaches for a real-world analog, stress cardiomyopathy, Takotsubo, the so-called broken heart syndrome, where acute shock disrupts cardiac function without coronaries clogging or muscle dying. Could a medical droid miss that? Perhaps the algorithms aren't built for a neurohumoral storm triggered by psychic trauma rather than physiology alone. But Takotsubo is usually survivable with supportive care. Padmé's rapid, irreversible slide strains that frame. Others look to the Force, arguing that what chokes the throat can also choke the life link between two people who have braided their identities too tightly to unspool. If the Force binds all things, can it unbind a life that cannot bear the knot it tied? It's poetic and haunting, and also conveniently untestable, the kind of explanation a diagnostic suite can neither confirm nor treat. A rougher, darker theory points at Palpatine. In the operating theater below, Padmé fades, in the black chrysalis above, an emperor births a Sith in iron. The film crosscuts between the labored rhythm of her breaths and the mechanical gasp of Vader's first. Some viewers read transference into the montage. Sid IOUs feeds one life to another, stealing what Padmé has left to seal his prize. It's thematically snug, a predator who consumes love to weaponize loss, but canon never makes the siphon textual. No ritual, no incantation, no statement beyond the manipulator's cold, perfect lie. In your anger, you killed her. Could he be both taunting and confessing? He could. Does the text prove it? It doesn't. We feel the rhyme and want it to be reason, the story keeps it an echo. There is also the simplest biomedical objection: childbirth is dangerous even in advanced settings. Hemorrhage, embolism, eclampsia, each can turn a delivery into an emergency. The droid, however, negates those outright. Medically, she is completely healthy. If you grant the universe its own competence, then the machine is excluding the common killers with authority, not stumbling over them. That narrows the plausible physical causes back to the force choke or to an extraordinary neuropsychological collapse. But if the choke is the culprit, why the insistence on clean scans? If collapse, why the speed and finality? The patches keep circling until they land where the film seems determined to be. This is not a failure of medicine, it is the price of a mythic choice. She believes Anakin is gone. What is left of Padmé? Her courage, her clarity, she gives to the children with their names, and then the story lets her leave. What remains, then, is tone and its consequences. The prequels are operatic, they surf a high wave of passion where symbolism drives causality. But that high water leaves silt when it recedes. If a medical droid can give a lyrical diagnosis, what else in this era is described instead of explained? If the Order can watch Anakin unravel and miss the fracture line in front of them, who else will they fail to read? Padmé's death is the trilogy's quietest indictment: institutions present, confident, and useless at the fulcrum. When institutions miss the obvious, their judgment elsewhere deserves scrutiny. So when Dooku says a Sith controls the Senate, the Council's reaction becomes a test they fail. In the red stone hush of Geonosis he plays confessor, telling Obi-Wan that a Dark Lord, Darth Sidious, has the Senate in his fist and that the Trade Federation serves that shadow. It's the most dangerous kind of truth, delivered by a liar, wrapped in an invitation to treason. Obi-Wan reports the claim, the Council notes it, then moves on to the immediate crisis: hostages, droid foundries, a separatist army massing. Yoda warns that the dark side clouds everything. Mace measures action against a political grid where Jedi authority depends on a Senate already suffused with fear. The claim is extraordinary, the proof is thin, and war is at the door. But isn't that when you sharpen your questions, not sheath them? Fans defend the Council with 3 good lines of argument. First, source credibility. Dooku is a separatist leader and a former Jedi who turned his back on the Order. Even if he tells the truth, he's telling it to recruit Obi-Wan. Why would you restructure your strategy around a pitch? Second, perception limits. The Order's foresight is genuinely degraded. If the shroud is real, then doctrinal tools, meditation, premonition, consensus, return noise instead of signal. Third, jurisdiction and optics. Accuse the Chancellor's circle without hard evidence and you collapse the compact that lets the Jedi operate at all. If you're wrong, you spark a constitutional crisis. If you're right, you've just announced to the very man you suspect that you're onto him. Under those constraints, caution reads like wisdom. And yet the specific shape of Dooku's warning matches too many odd shadows to shrug off. Who ordered a clone army in a dead Jedi's name? Why is Kamino missing from the archives when a Padawan can still find it with a gravity plot? Who paid Jango Fett, and why does Jango's trail lead through a figure who signs his contracts as a T? Uranus, Dooku's own Sith title? Credibility can be tested by triangulation. You don't need to storm the Senate to run a covert audit, widen surveillance on a handful of power brokers, pull financial threads through shell companies, and quietly task the Temple's best investigators with mapping overlaps between the Chancellor's emergency powers, the banking clan's movements, and the separatist procurement pipeline. Where are the parallel teams, insulated from Council politics, told to assume Dooku is half right and to see how much of the other half they can prove? The Clone Wars series shows the Order trying, sometimes. Tip of the spear: knights follow leads, Anakin and Obi-Wan cut through shells and aliases, Yoda seeks answers along stranger paths. But the attempts are intermittent, reactive, and constantly cannibalized by the demands of an industrial war. Palpatine salts every channel with incentives to prioritize today's convoy over tomorrow's pattern. By the time the Council elevates its suspicion from troubling to critical, Dooku has served his purpose. He has told the truth early so that, told again later, it sounds like background noise. The Jedi keep choosing the battle in front of them and, in doing so, let the strategy above them go unscrutinized. There's a harder, more uncomfortable read that fits the text too well to ignore. The Order has become managerial. It polices, advises, commands everything except doubt its own structures. Even when evidence and intuition part ways, the Council seeks synthesis rather than rupture. It keeps the Senate close to preserve legitimacy, keeps the Chancellor close to maintain access, keeps Anakin close to manage volatility. This is empathy as containment, discipline as decorum. But capture by procedure is still capture. If a Sith tells you the center is rotten, and the smell keeps coming from the center, what is the plan that does not depend on the center's permission to look? Record should catch what intuition misses, unless the records themselves are doctored. Which is precisely what we learn when Kamino vanishes from the archive and 𝒍𝒆𝒑 order comes due. Obi-Wan hunts a planet that is not there, plots its mass by the absence it leaves in surrounding stars, and walks into a rain-slick facility where long-necked engineers greet him like a project manager late to a ribbon cutting. A clone army, commissioned almost 10 years ago by Jedi Master 𝒍𝒆𝒑, is ready for delivery to the Republic. Back at the temple, Yoda says the quiet part aloud, only a Jedi could have erased those files. The accusation lands with the weight of a diagnosis. This isn't a gap, it's a deletion, performed from inside the body that depends on the record to know itself. Canon later fills in the bones. 𝒍𝒆𝒑 foresaw conflict and unilaterally commissioned an army. Before he could report back, he was murdered. His death arranged by 𝒍𝒑 and Dooku, his name reproposed as a key to keep the order of record while the Sith seized the project. Dooku, as Tyrannus, recruited Jango Fett as the template on Bogdan's moon. Kaminoans, allergic to moral entanglements but faithful to contracts, kept growing soldiers for a client they believed still spoke for the Republic. The Sith thus gained three advantages at once: a private procurement laundered into public service, a kill switch hidden inside the product, and an opponent, the Jedi, lured into leading the very army built to betray them. It's an elegant trap, so elegant that the elegance itself becomes suspicious. How does an order of this scale avoid a single audit? Fans defend the plausibility with a realist's toolkit. The Outer Rim is a blind spot, Kamino's isolation and storms make traffic hard to monitor. The pre-war Republic is bureaucratically ossified, black budget slosh between committees that no one person can map. A decade-long lead time plus Kaminoan confidentiality clauses mean the paper trail isn't paper at all, it's encrypted invoices and escrowed credits that read like normal defense R&D. And in any case, by the time ships are falling out of the sky on Geonosis, there's no time for provenance, only triage. All of that has texture and bite. Yet Attack of the Clones itself insists the Jedi once trusted their archives as a map of reality. If an item does not appear in our records, it does not exist, and the Clone Wars shows the Order doing exactly what a captured process does under pressure. It treats the arrival of a ready-made solution as proof of its own wisdom in accepting it. What about the practicalities, the 1,000 little signals large projects emit? 1 million troopers on the way, need protein slurry by the kiloton, advanced tutors by the cohort, ships in and out with rhythms that light up shipping registries. Wouldn't someone in the Trade Federation, the banking clan, or the Republic's own customs nets notice traffic spikes tagged to a storm-wrapped world? The defense here leans on the Sith again. If Dooku and 𝒍𝒑 already control the choke points of finance and freight, the very institutions that would notice are instruments of the concealment. You don't hide a mountain, you declare the mountain classified and move the fence. Fair enough, but then why, when the Jedi finally stand in the rain and see the mountain, does no one pause to ask, who paid the last invoice? There's a tighter, more intimate failure nested inside the larger one. Kamino doesn't only grow bodies, it installs obedience. Inhibitor chips, presented as behavioral safety against aggression or instability, become Order 66 tripwire. The Clone Wars shows a trooper discovering the implant's true purpose, a medical cover story deployed to bury the discovery, and a temple so preoccupied with the daily calamity of war that it cannot, or will not, stop to tear open a mystery that threatens its entire strategy. The point isn't that the Jedi are fools, it's that their process has been retooled to prefer the fire in front of them to the fuse at their feet. And once you accept a miracle army on emergency terms, every hard question you didn't ask at the loading dock comes back as a harder question you cannot afford to ask in the field. Even the Sifo Dyas did commission them clarification, meant to tidy the premise, leaves grit. If a single master can bind the Republic to a decade-long weapons program without council approval, what does oversight mean? If he can't, if the Sith spoofed authorizations and laundered funds through shell appropriations, why can no one reconstruct the chain well enough to halt deployment before Geonosis? The narrative answer is clear: the war must begin, and it must begin with a choice the Jedi will regret. The in-universe answer is murkier: institutions designed to keep a ledger let a ghost sign their names. You can call that tragedy. You can also call it a system that taught itself to trust the stamp more than the hand that holds it. Which leaves us with the image the films draw again and again: a glowing archive room where gaps look like facts, a rainy platform where a delivery passes for destiny, a battlefield where a coded word turns brothers into executioners. Records can be altered, orders can be forged, armies can arrive with their betrayals pre-installed. If that is the climate, then vigilance has to move from the screen to the scene, from what the display shows to how it was made to show it. The Jedi learned that lesson too late. Even droids aren't immune to convenient capability gaps. Few details are as quietly disruptive as R2-D2's jets. In Attack of the Clones, he ignites boosters hidden in his legs, hovering up platforms in the droid factory, rescuing Padmé from molten death, even lighting them again in Revenge of the Sith to roast buzz droids mid-battle. They're practical, logical even, and Astromech needs maneuverability outside of a socket, and the galaxy brims with vertical shafts, hangars, and catwalks. And then, suddenly, they vanish. In the original trilogy, set years later, R2 is a waddling cylinder with no lift, tumbling into Dagobah's swamp, rolling through the deserts of Tatooine, unable to follow Luke up stairs or ramps without help. A single continuity detail, his ability to fly, creates a canyon between the prequels and the originals. Defenses cluster quickly. The simplest is age. By the time of A New Hope, R2 is decades old, with scars, patched panels, and wear and tear from countless battles. His boosters, some argue, simply burned out. No one ever repaired them, parts scarce, resources scarce, and by then the rebellion had other priorities. This works as a practical patch, especially when you consider that astromechs are mass-produced, and specialized parts for less common modules might not always be available. But the trouble is tone. In the OT, Luke never once refers to a lost ability, and no character ever suggests that the droid once had wings. The absence feels more like a narrative blind spot than an in-universe breakdown. A second defense calls the boosters experimental. The Clone Wars series hints at this: other R2 units do not demonstrate jets as casually, and it's possible R2 had prototype upgrades from Naboo's royal engineers or Anakin himself. If those were one-off modifications, their reliability might always have been temporary. By the time of the rebellion, the tech may have been too unstable to use safely, or too dangerous for a spy droid trying to pass unnoticed in enemy facilities. But again, if that were the case, why never mention it? A line from Luke, "I thought your boosters were shot years ago," would have sealed the gap. There's also the storytelling explanation. The OT's creators never imagined R2 airborne. His charm comes from pluck and resourcefulness, from waddling into danger and finding unlikely solutions. Give him rockets and he bypasses half the tension. No swamp, no desert crawl, no need for ropes in Jabba's palace. The boosters elevate utility but flatten narrative stakes. By contrast, the prequels, committed to spectacle and continuity of hardware design, couldn't resist arming him with hidden surprises. One trilogy needs R2 earthbound, the other needs him airborne. Reconciling the two means bending either lore or meta-story. Some fans try to split the difference. The rockets worked for a while, but fuel cells and maintenance cycles outpaced practicality. By the OT, R2 keeps the boosters in his legs, inert, relics of a younger era. Like a soldier's medals, carried but never used. This patch preserves continuity while admitting silence, and it honors the image of a droid too stubborn to ever truly discard a tool, even when it fails him. But beneath the specific fix is a larger pattern. Once again, Star Wars reveals a galaxy where abilities emerge when the story needs them and retreat when the story doesn't. Jedi leap differently from film to film, ships accelerate at the speed of plot, droids forget or remember features depending on the moment. When R2 flies, the saga is maximalist. When he waddles, it is minimalist. Both versions are charming. Both are internally coherent in isolation. Together, they wobble. And that wobble brings us to a different absence, one not of parts, but of people. If a Jedi Master can liberate a boy but leave his mother in chains, what else has been left to rust in the margins? At this point in our journey through the saga's contradictions, a pattern has begun to emerge. One whole on its own looks like an oversight, a moment where the story's reach exceeds its grasp. Leia remembers her mother though their lives barely touched. Obi-Wan hedges about droids he fought beside. Vader consents a pilot's instincts but not his own daughter's. A gunner ignores an empty pod and thereby saves the rebellion. A Death Star waits patiently for orbital geometry to play out. A miracle shot destroys it because an exhaust port was left, or made, undefended. Stormtroopers praised for precision miss when narrative tension needs them to. A farm boy races up the Jedi ladder in years instead of decades. Han brags in units of distance about speed. Teddy bear warriors topple an armored legion. The galaxy's most feared bounty hunter slips into comedy. Padmé dies with no clear cause but a broken bond. The Jedi Council ignores a confession that should have been unignorable. A vast clone army appears under a dead man's name. And a droid's boosters vanish when the tone of the story shifts. Each of these fractures can be patched, through lore, through psychology, through technology, through the Force. But when you line them up, the patches themselves reveal something deeper about how Star Wars tells its story. The saga prizes emotion over procedure, image over engineering, myth over manual. It gives us moments that feel right in isolation, then asks us to accept them together even when they don't quite reconcile. Fans step in as custodians, smoothing seams with theories that preserve the glow. Leia's memory as the Force, Kenobi's evasions as fieldcraft, Vader's blindness as psychology, R2's missing rockets as age and disrepair. These aren't just rationalizations, they're acts of affection. They show how much people want the story to keep singing in harmony, even when the notes rub. And what have these scenes shown us? That the Empire again and again underestimates what looks small. It shrugs at an escape pod, it laughs at starfighters, it dismisses Ewoks, it mistakes a boy for a farmer long after he is already a pilot. The Jedi, for their part, underestimate what looks hidden. They ignore a Sith's half-truth, They accept an army without pulling its threads. They trust records that can be edited and droids that can be upgraded without comment. Both sides misjudge because both sides prefer the convenient story over the inconvenient detail. That is why the saga's contradictions are not just errors, they are windows into the character's blind spots, the institution's failings, and the filmmaker's own balancing act between legend and logistics. Which brings us to what lies ahead. If Leia's memory was too full, R2's boosters too absent, and the Council too cautious, then what do we make of choices even harder to swallow, choices that look like whiplash turns of character? What do we say when a Jedi Knight goes from anguished protector to slaughterer of children in the span of a single act? The next scene in the saga is not a machine or a weapon, but a man, Anakin Skywalker, whose fall to the dark side accelerates with such violence that it still unsettles fans almost 2 decades later. If Padmé's fate was abrupt, Anakin's is a storm, and we need to ask why it happened so quickly, and whether any patch can slow it down. No scene in Star Wars invites more debate than the speed of Anakin's collapse. Across the prequels, the arc is meant to be tragic inevitability, a boy pulled from slavery, groomed by prophecy, pressed under expectations, and seduced by a master manipulator. But in Revenge of the Sith the final descent happens not in years, but in minutes. One moment Anakin kneels before the Council, furious but still seeking validation. The next, he is kneeling before 𝑺𝒍𝒆𝒑, christened Darth Vader. The line between doubt and damnation feels thin, and the leap across it jolts even sympathetic viewers. The defense begins with a long burn. Anakin's distrust of the Jedi is seeded early. They took him from his mother, then left her vulnerable to die. They restrained his instincts, treated him as volatile, doubted him even as they depended on him. The Council's refusal to grant him the rank of Master in Episode 3 cuts deepest of all. It's not just status, it's proof that they will never see him as equal, even as they rely on him as a weapon. Leia on fear of loss, cultivated by 𝑺𝒍𝒆𝒑 through whispered promises. The death of his mother already taught him helplessness, and the visions of Padmé dying in childbirth make that wound unbearable. The Sith offer is not framed as treachery but as salvation, a way to stop death itself. From this angle, the whiplash is a dam breaking, not a switch flipping. Yet even this defense struggles with the pacing of the final act. Palpatine reveals himself as Darth 𝑺𝒍𝒆𝒑 in the Chancellor's office, and within a single day Anakin cycles through every possible reaction: shock, conflicted loyalty, decision to report him, betrayal of Mace Windu, and finally the kneel that seals his fate. For many fans, the compression makes his turn look less like inevitability and more like plot necessity. The galaxy needs Darth Vader now, so Anakin must choose now. The tragedy loses some air because it doesn't have time to breathe. Expanded lore and the Clone Wars attempt to smooth the scene. The series shows Anakin's attachment issues in full, his fierce bond with Ahsoka, his moral compromises in war, his suspicion that the Jedi Order has become political. By the time Revenge of the Sith arrives, he is already brittle, primed to see the Council as hypocrites and 𝑺𝒍𝒆𝒑 as the only figure who both trusts and empowers him. But even with that scaffolding, the on-screen moment is stark. He goes from condemning Palpatine as evil to massacring children at the temple with only the thinnest connective tissue, fear of Padmé and belief in destiny. Some fans propose a Force-centered patch. They argue that 𝑺𝒍𝒆𝒑 doesn't just persuade Anakin, he overwhelms him, using the dark side like a tide to bend his perceptions. The kneeling scene, from this perspective, is less choice than corruption, a psychic override layered atop desperation. That explanation makes the speed plausible, but it also risks stripping Anakin of agency, turning a moral tragedy into a possession story. Others lean toward Shakespeare. Great falls often come in sudden plunges, not gradual slopes. Othello doesn't strangle Desdemona after years of brooding, he tips in one storm of jealousy. The point is the violence of the change, not its subtlety. And still, the problem lingers. We are asked to believe that Anakin can slaughter Jedi younglings, wipe out separatist leaders, and choke his wife to near death all within days of a tearful "What have I done?" That speed creates dissonance. If he could do all this so quickly, was he ever truly good? Or if he was, then why did one night of terror erase it so completely? The saga's answer is harsh but consistent: fear accelerates destiny. When Anakin chooses 𝑺𝒍𝒆𝒑, he doesn't just tilt, he falls through every level at once, because the dark side doesn't offer gradual decline. It offers release, an immediate, overwhelming justification for rage, suspicion, and grief. It feels abrupt because it is abrupt. That doesn't erase the whiplash, it reframes it as design. Whether that satisfies depends on whether you prefer your tragedies to unfold like cracks in stone or like glass shattering in a single strike. And once we admit that sudden fractures define this story, we must look at another fracture. This one not of loyalty but of continuity. If Anakin's turn feels abrupt, so too does his redemption. How does a father who slaughtered innocents in a temple decades earlier earn absolution with one final act? The next scene takes us from his fall to his salvation. The fall was fast, but the return is faster still. In Return of the Jedi, decades of cruelty condense into a single act. Vader lifts the Emperor over his head and casts him into the abyss. Sparks shower, Palpatine screams, and Luke's life is saved. When the smoke clears, Vader is no longer Vader, he is Anakin Skywalker once more, forgiven, luminous, a spirit at peace beside Yoda and Obi-Wan. The story wants us to accept that the weight of slaughter, betrayal, and tyranny is dissolved in a moment of love for a son. And yet, for many, the seam is glaring. How can one act outweigh the genocide of the Jedi, the enslavement of whole systems, the massacre of innocents? Can redemption be that quick? The defense starts where the films insist, with intent. Star Wars frames redemption not as legal absolution but as spiritual alignment with the Force. Anakin doesn't erase his crimes, he rejects the darkness and returns to compassion at the last possible moment. It's a theology of choice, not a ledger of deeds. Yoda told Luke, once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. The implication was permanence. But Obi-Wan's faith, there is still good in him, opens another path. The dark side dominates only until you refuse it. By sacrificing himself to save Luke, Anakin makes the choice he failed to make on Mustafar. It doesn't undo, it restores. Expanded canon works to give that frame nuance. Return of the Jedi, from a certain point of view, depicts stormtroopers, officers, and even machines experiencing Vader as a figure of terror. He is not softened, not misunderstood, his evil is undeniable. But when he turns, it is not for glory or power. It is for a single person against the master who had defined his existence. The Clone Wars and prequel trilogy deepen that bond. From pod racer to knight, Anakin was always defined by attachments: his mother, Padmé, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan. The Emperor thought he had severed them all. Luke proves otherwise. The instant redemption is really the re-emergence of a buried pattern. When love calls, Anakin moves. Still, the moral discomfort remains. If redemption is choice-based, what about accountability? He murdered children in the temple, executed prisoners, choked his wife, hunted Jedi across the stars. The galaxy would never forgive him, nor should it. Fan debate often draws a line between forgiveness and redemption. Forgiveness is social, granted by those harmed. Redemption in Star Wars is metaphysical. The Force acknowledges balance restored, even if the galaxy never will. Luke doesn't absolve his father's crimes, he witnesses his father's soul heal. In this light, Anakin's presence as a Force ghost is not a triumphal "all is well," but a quieter statement: he died choosing the light, and that is the measure the Force applies. There's a narrative reason for the speed, too. The saga began with a boy believed to be the chosen one, destined to bring balance. If his fall stretched over years, his rise must be sudden, or balance is never struck. The Emperor dies because Vader intervenes, not because Luke duels. It had to be him, and it had to be final. The speed makes sense mythically, even if it feels uneasy morally. But that unease is fertile ground. Star Wars has always balanced between myth and realism. In myth, one act can redeem. In realism, justice would demand reckoning beyond a single gesture. The tension doesn't vanish, it lingers, asking us whether the saga is a fable of cosmic harmony or a history of violence. Perhaps it is both. Perhaps the beauty of Vader's end is that it raises the question and refuses to settle it. And once we accept that the saga resolves its greatest villain's arc with such swiftness, we begin to notice how quickly other resolutions arrive too. If the fall and redemption of Anakin are compressed into single choices, what about the fate of the Empire itself? Can a regime spanning thousands of systems truly collapse because one battle station and one Emperor fall? The next contradiction is not about a person, but an entire galactic order. When Palpatine falls into the reactor shaft and the Death Star erupts above Endor, the original trilogy frames the moment as the end of tyranny. Fireworks light the skies of Coruscant, Naboo, Tatooine, even Bespin in the special edition montage. Children cheer, stormtroopers are pulled down by crowds, and statues of the Emperor topple in celebration. It feels final, cathartic, a galactic exhale. But here the saga collides with its own scale. The Empire is not a single ship or even a single station. It is a government spanning millions of systems, with fleets, governors, treasuries, and armies on every rim. Could it really unravel in a single night? The defense points to Palpatine himself. The Empire is not merely authoritarian, it is cultic. The chain of command is bound to one man's will, a Dark Lord whose force powers amplify his political machinery. When that figure vanishes, the structure above him splinters. This makes sense mythically. The Sith embody centralization to the point of fragility, so the Emperor's death is the regime's death. Expanded lore like the Aftermath novels and Battlefront 2 reinforces this by showing Operation Cinder, Palpatine's contingency plan, burning loyal worlds with orbital strikes, spreading chaos among his own ranks, and accelerating disillusion. Instead of uniting the Empire, his death triggers programmed collapse. And yet, even with contingencies and cults of personality, the scale is daunting. Armies don't vanish when a leader falls. Fleets don't disband overnight. Nazi Germany fought on after Hitler's suicide. The Soviet Union endured long after Stalin. Fan rationalizations invoke both historical precedent and canon expansions. The Empire doesn't die at Endor, it fractures. The New Republic spends years fighting warlords, mopping up admirals, and forcing surrenders. The Mandalorian shows remnants still operating years later, Moff Gideon a symbol of that persistence. The sequels remind us that failure to fully root out the Empire is what allows the First Order to rise. So Endor wasn't the end, only the pivot. Still, the tonal whiplash between the film's presentation and the broader canon remains. The victory montage in Return of the Jedi suggests catharsis, as though tyranny itself evaporated. Later lore reframes it as propaganda, a hopeful image broadcast across the galaxy, a myth told faster than the reality could match. That reinterpretation works well. Rebellion thrives on symbols, and a galaxy scarred by oppression needs to believe in sudden liberation. Myths can topple statues even before politics does. But it circles us back to the same pattern we've seen with Vader's redemption, Anakin's fall, and Padmé's death. The story resolves epochal conflicts in moments. Palpatine dies, and the Empire is over. Vader saves his son, and a lifetime of evil is washed away. Anakin kneels, and a lifetime of promise is obliterated. These accelerations serve myth, not realism, and they leave fans to stitch in the longer tale. And if the galaxy can pivot so fast on Endor, we must ask what it pivots toward. If the Empire fell overnight, why is the New Republic so fragile? How can Leia's movement win the galaxy only to see it squandered within a generation? The next contradiction isn't about endings, but about beginnings, how victory fails to hold, and how a saga that promised balance delivers a sequel trilogy built on collapse. If the fireworks at Endor promised a clean dawn, the decades that follow tell a grimmer story. The expanded universe once imagined a galaxy slowly rebuilding under the Republic's steady hand, but canon gives us something more brittle. In The Force Awakens, barely a generation after Palpatine's fall, the Republic is already fractured, hesitant, and fatally unprepared for the First Order's strike. How did a rebellion that toppled an empire collapse so quickly into hesitation? The defense begins with the cost of war. The rebellion was never a government in waiting, it was a coalition of cells, spies, smugglers, and sympathetic systems bound by one goal: remove the Emperor. Victory left it with legitimacy but not infrastructure. Billions of credits of reconstruction, trillions of lives displaced, entire planets scarred by the war economy. This is not a foundation for stability. In canon novels like Bloodline, we learn that the New Republic deliberately demilitarized, both from idealism and from fear of repeating imperial excess. Fleets were reduced, command decentralized, and power given back to the Senate. That choice reads noble but left the Republic exposed when a new threat arose. Fan defenses note that democracy is messy by design. After years of dictatorship, returning power to the people means reopening old rivalries. Core worlds and rim systems still distrust one another. Some see Coruscant as too powerful, others want less centralization, not more. Leia, who might have united factions, becomes sidelined when her heritage as Vader's daughter leaks, turning her into a pariah. The resistance she forms is technically independent, a splinter force born because the official government cannot, or will not, act decisively. In other words, the New Republic's weakness is not a plot hole but a logical extension of its politics. It won the war but lost its cohesion. Still, the speed jars. In Return of the Jedi, the Empire falls with fireworks and jubilation. 30 years later, the Senate is complacent enough that Starkiller Base destroys its capital in a single strike. How does the pendulum swing so wide, so fast? One answer is myth again. Endor was not the end, it was a story about the end. The special edition montage can be read as propaganda, images broadcast across the galaxy, a hope more than a history. When the credits rolled, the Empire still had warlords, admirals, and fleets. Its fall was long and uneven, leaving scars that democracy struggled to stitch. The overnight collapse, then, is not literal but symbolic. And yet, that symbolic compression has consequences. The films gloss over decades of hard governance to deliver a fresh stage where evil can rise anew. Fans often feel whiplash, as though the sacrifices of the original heroes were squandered. What was the point of Luke's faith, Leia's leadership, Han's courage, if tyranny can rebound within a generation? Expanded canon works to patch this, showing Leia fighting tirelessly, Mon Mothma negotiating reforms, Luke training new Jedi. But the films demand simplicity, old villains return, new battles begin. The Republic's fragility becomes less a failure of characters and more a necessity of narrative. What we learn here is the same lesson the Clone Wars taught the Jedi: victory without vigilance is illusion. Just as the Republic failed to investigate the origins of its clone army, the New Republic fails to fortify against the remnants of Imperial power. Both fall not from one decisive blow but from a pattern of underestimation. And that leads us to the next contradiction, one written not in governments or armies, but in the Force itself. If balance was supposedly achieved, why does the dark side keep returning? If Anakin was the chosen one, why is the galaxy still waiting for prophecy to come true? If the New Republic's fragility casts doubt on political victory, the prophecy of the chosen one casts doubt on spiritual victory. From Keegan's first claim in The Phantom Menace, the saga sets Anakin Skywalker apart, conceived by the Force itself, destined to bring balance. And in Return of the Jedi, Luke declares that destiny fulfilled, Vader destroys the Emperor, the Sith line is ended, and Anakin dies redeemed. It should be closure. Yet the sequels reopen the wound. Darkness rises again in Snoke and Kylo Ren, the Sith Eternal whispers in the shadows, and Palpatine himself returns, defying death. If Anakin was the chosen one, why did his triumph not hold? The first defense is definitional. What does balanced mean? Some interpret it as equilibrium between light and dark, the Force existing in harmony rather than dominance. Others, especially the Jedi, interpret it as the eradication of the Sith. George Lucas leaned toward this second reading. Balance means purging the corruption of the dark side. By destroying Palpatine, Anakin did exactly that. The cycle is complete until other storytellers extend the cycle. In this view, the sequels complicate rather than contradict. Balance was achieved, but balance is not permanent. The Force breathes. It tips toward light or dark as choices ripple across generations. Expanded lore doubles down on this interpretation. In the Clone Wars, the Mortis arc presents cosmic avatars of light and dark, each essential, each dangerous in excess. Anakin is tested there and found wanting, foreshadowing both his fall and his ultimate role. Later, Yoda tells Ezra in Rebels that balance is not victory but vigilance. Even Luke, in The Last Jedi, reframes the prophecy, powerful light, powerful darkness. Balance, then, is never final. Anakin's act destroyed the Sith of his age, but the Force responds to new fears and new greed by raising new shadows. But the discomfort remains, especially for fans who want narrative finality. If Anakin is the chosen one, shouldn't his sacrifice endure longer than a single generation? The patch here is mythic rather than logical. Prophecies are always partial, always misread. Keegan believed in a savior. The Jedi interpreted balance as a purge. Anakin himself never understood his role. The prophecy, in this telling, was not a contract but a riddle. It was fulfilled at Endor, and then history moved forward. That isn't contradiction, but it does feel anticlimactic. Another angle reframes Rey as the continuation of Anakin's role rather than its undoing. If the prophecy says bring balance, not once and for all, then each generation's champion fulfills it anew. Anakin ends Palpatine's reign, Rey ends his resurrection. Balance, then, is less like a finish line and more like a duty station. This patch works for fans willing to read the prophecy flexibly, but it dilutes Anakin's uniqueness. If everyone can be the chosen one, is anyone? Which leads us to the heart of the contradiction. Prophecy promises closure, but Star Wars thrives on renewal. Every time the Force balances, new stories unbalance it. Myth demands repetition, but audiences often crave resolution. The result is tension between what Anakin accomplished and what the saga keeps reopening. And once we accept that the Force's greatest prophecy can be rewritten, it casts doubt on the other cornerstones of the saga. If destiny itself is malleable, then what of memory? If the chosen one's triumph can unravel, why should we expect consistency in the visions and recollections that drive characters forward? The next scene takes us back to the beginning. The Force dream that started Anakin's descent, the visions of Padmé's death, and the way prophecy itself can be a snare. We have traveled now through collapses and redemptions, through armies conjured by fraud and governments undone by hesitation. Again and again, the saga sets up grand resolutions, Endor as the Empire's end, Vader's sacrifice as a closing of the Darkseid's chapter, only to peel them open again in later stories. The seams are not accidents alone, they are evidence of a narrative that refuses to stay closed. Star Wars is a myth that promises balance but thrives on imbalance. Look at the rhythm. Anakin falls too quickly, then is redeemed too quickly. The Empire collapses overnight, yet resurfaces by the time Rey lifts a saber. The New Republic wins legitimacy, only to dissolve into impotence in a generation. Each time, the saga trades durability for drama. It chooses to resolve with mythic clarity, then revisits the stage and reveals the cost of that clarity. These contradictions frustrate precisely because they come from love. We want Vader's sacrifice to mean something permanent, we want Ender's victory to endure, we want the Chosen One's prophecy to seal the galaxy's fate. The saga refuses permanence because permanence would end the story. And so, prophecy becomes the ultimate mirror. It promises closure, but its meaning bends each time a new storyteller touches it. Did Anakin bring balance? Yes, until Snoke rises. Did the Sith end? Yes, until Palpatine cackles on Exegol. Is Rey an heir to the prophecy or its replacement? The films never settle, because prophecy in Star Wars is always double-edged, a vision of inevitability that characters interpret to their own ruin. This is where memory and vision intertwine. Leia remembers a mother she barely knew, Luke remembers a father who betrayed him but now shines as a spirit, Anakin remembers dreams of Padmé's death that both warn and ensnare him. Prophecy in Star Wars is never clean. It's always laced with ambiguity, tempting heroes to act rashly and villains to twist its wording. If lore itself can contradict, then how much more fragile are the visions that drive choices? Which is where we turn next. Having examined the prophecy of the Chosen One, we now arrive at the visions that cracked Anakin's resolve, his nightmares of Padmé, his desperation to master a future he cannot control, and the paradox that prophecy itself creates the destiny it predicts. If balance is slippery, what hope is there for foresight? And if foresight cannot be trusted, what does that say about every choice the saga asks its characters to make? The prophecy of the Chosen One set Anakin's life on rails, but it was his visions that sped the train toward disaster. In Attack of the Clones, his nightmares of Shmi dying in captivity send him racing to Tatooine. The dream is true enough, he arrives only in time to hold her as she dies. In Revenge of the Sith, the same pattern repeats. This time the visions are of Padmé, pale and gasping in childbirth, whispering his name before fading away. To Anakin, the meaning is as plain as the loss of his mother, the Force is showing him what will happen unless he stops it. What he cannot see is that the visions are less warnings than snares. The tragedy here is that his response to prophecy creates the very future he fears. If he had trusted Padmé's resilience and the natural course of events, she might have lived. Instead, his desperation drives him into Sidious's orbit, where promises of forbidden knowledge become irresistible. In the end, it is his turn to the dark side, his chokehold on Mustafar, that wounds Padmé and leads to her death. The loop is cruel but precise, fear of loss drives action, action creates the loss, and the prophecy fulfills itself. Fans often ask, were the visions planted, or natural? Canon is ambiguous. Palpatine claims the dark side can cheat death, and the Clone Wars hints that the Sith can project or manipulate dreams. Yet nothing on screen confirms that Sid IOUs gave Anakin those nightmares. It may be more chilling if he didn't, that the Force itself showed Anakin a possible future, and his own inability to let go turned possibility into reality. Yoda's warning in Revenge of the Sith, the fear of loss is a path to the dark side, was not advice, but diagnosis. The Jedi's handling of this fracture deserves scrutiny. Anakin goes to Yoda for counsel, but receives only abstractions, train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. To a knight already haunted by his mother's death, already fragile with attachment, the advice sounds cold, impossible. What he needs is empathy and practical guidance. What he hears is dismissal. The Council's blindness here echoes the blind spots we've traced before. The refusal to probe Dooku's warning, the acceptance of the clone army without question. When prophecy emerges, they fall back on doctrine rather than meet the crisis with imagination. That gap leaves Sid IOUs to step in as the only figure willing to promise concrete answers. And here the larger contradiction sharpens. The Jedi believe in prophecy, but mistrust visions. They raise Anakin on the idea that he is the chosen one, but when he seeks help for nightmares, they tell him not to trust his senses. They live by foresight, yet dismiss foresight when it frightens them. That institutional inconsistency leaves Anakin stranded between two poles, duty to an order that won't comfort him, and temptation from a Sith who will. The outcome feels both inevitable and preventable, which is exactly why it still stings. The lesson in all of this is that prophecy in Star Wars is not a gift but a hazard. It tempts characters to actors. If the future were fixed, when in truth the act of trying to change it locks it into place. Anakin never learns to sit with ambiguity, he reaches for control, and control becomes his undoing. The films show this cycle clearly, but they also leave us with a haunting question: if the Force sends visions that are so easily misread, is the problem with the seer, or with the Force itself? And that question leads us forward, because visions and prophecy are not only Anakin's burden. Luke sees his friend suffering in The Empire Strikes Back and rushes into a duel he cannot win. Rey sees Ben Solo's future and believes she can turn him. Again and again, the saga shows that sight beyond sight is as dangerous as blindness. If foresight is unreliable, what about memory? If the Force cannot give a stable vision of tomorrow, can it give a stable view of yesterday? That brings us full circle, back to Leia's impossible memory of Padmé, and the way recollection in Star Wars bends to serve the story. We return now to one of the saga's most delicate contradictions, the scene that appeared in Return of the Jedi long before the prequels even existed. Luke asks Leia what she remembers of her real mother. Leia answers with quiet sorrow, just a little bit. She died when I was very young. She was very beautiful, kind, but sad. It is a tender moment, one that deepens Leia's gravity as a character. Yet in Revenge of the Sith, Padmé dies within minutes of childbirth. Leia, newborn, cannot possibly remember her, certainly not enough to describe her temperament. The contradiction is simple but profound: a daughter remembers what she could never have known. Fans have produced several defenses. The first and most popular is that Leia's memories are not traditional memories but impressions through the Force. As Luke inherits his father's power, Leia inherits her mother's presence, glimpsed in emotion rather than sight. This fits the mythic tone. Leia recalls kindness and sadness not because she saw them, but because she felt them, the way Jedi sense each other's emotions across space. It's poetic, and it patches the seam without negating either trilogy. Still, the dialogue in Return of the Jedi does not frame her answer as mystical, it frames it as human, natural recollection. That's where the defense, however elegant, feels slightly forced. A second defense places the weight on Bail Organa and the adoptive family on Alderaan. Perhaps Leia, as a child, asked about her birth mother, and was told stories so often that they hardened into her memories. Anyone who has grown up hearing family anecdotes knows how easily narrative becomes indistinguishable from recall. If Bail or his wife spoke of Padmé with reverence, Leia might genuinely believe she remembers. This patch grounds the problem in psychology rather than mysticism, and it harmonizes with Leia's strong empathy. But it also undercuts the poignancy of the scene. The intimacy of her words, "She was very beautiful, kind, but sad," hits harder if they're first-hand, not second-hand. There is also the meta-explanation: George Lucas had not yet decided how Padmé would die when he wrote Return of the Jedi. Leia's memory was meant to give her a weight Luke lacked, to foreshadow the wisdom and resilience she would embody. Later, when the prequels fixed Padmé's death at childbirth, the story inherited a contradiction. Expanded canon hasn't erased it, though novels and reference material occasionally gesture at Force sensitivity to explain Leia's impressions. Ultimately, the films themselves leave it unresolved. What matters is not that Leia's memory contradicts the timeline, but what it symbolizes. Her answer gives Luke, and the audience, a bridge between eras. Padmé is remembered not through history books, but through the heart of her daughter. The moment is fragile, a piece of myth that the later films complicate but never destroy. Perhaps that's the point. In a galaxy where visions mislead and prophecies misfire, memory too is unreliable. Yet even unreliable memory carries truth, if not accuracy. Leia's words are not correct in detail, but they are right in essence. Her mother was beautiful, kind, and sad. This contradiction returns us to the theme that has threaded through every chapter: Star Wars is a myth first, a chronicle second. Its timelines wobble because its truths are emotional, not historical. Leia's memory endures not because it is accurate, but because it is needed. And that need tells us where to look next, at another kind of memory, not personal but galactic, the way droids, those tireless witnesses of history, seem to forget or withhold exactly what would make the past clear. If Leia remembers too much, why do C-3PO and R2-D2 remember too little? If Leia remembers too much, C-3PO and R2-D2 remember far too little. Across 9 films, they are the saga's most constant witnesses. They stand at Naboo's royal palace, wander Tatooine's deserts, ride in the cockpits of Jedi starfighters, and stand in the throne room as Palpatine crowns himself emperor. They serve both Anakin and Luke, Padmé and Leia, Bail Organa and Mon Mothma. No one else spans the entire Skywalker story so completely. And yet, when the original trilogy begins, they behave as if most of that history never happened. The most glaring gap is R2-D2. He fought in the Clone Wars, plugged into starships, accompanied Anakin on campaign after campaign. He even held the plans to the Death Star in A New Hope. But when he meets Obi-Wan Kenobi, he does not remember him explicitly, nor does Obi-Wan acknowledge him beyond a passing glance. It's possible this is deliberate discretion, Obi-Wan pretending ignorance to protect Luke. Yet R2 himself never offers context. For the audience, it plays as amnesia. C-3PO's gap is easier to explain. At the end of Revenge of the Sith, Bail Organa orders his memory wiped. The droid who had once served Shmi and Padmé, who had watched Anakin's entire transformation, begins A New Hope as a blank slate. That is clean canon. R2, however, is never wiped. His silence is conspicuous. Expanded lore explains this as programming limits, astromechs record data for utility, not exposition, and only speak when their masters ask the right questions. But even so, R2's narrative restraint is extraordinary. He knows Luke's father was Anakin Skywalker, he knows Leia's mother, he knows the truth about Order 66. He carries the entire buried history of the galaxy inside his databanks, and never says a word. Why? Fan defenses divide into 2 camps. One sees R2 as loyal but pragmatic. He knows the truth is too dangerous to share. To protect Luke, to preserve Leia's safety, he plays dumb. He is a secret keeper by design. This defense honors R2's character as more perceptive than he appears. The second camp sees a meta reason. Lucas never wrote the prequels when the OT was filmed, so R2's reticence is retroactive necessity. Within the OT, his comic relief and a trusty mechanic, not the galaxy's ultimate archivist. Once the prequels reframed him as a central witness, the silence became a paradox. And then there's Obi-Wan himself. "I don't recall ever owning a droid," he tells Luke. Technically true, R2 belonged to Naboo, then Padmé, then Bail. But it's also evasive, a dodge to avoid confronting the past. Expanded canon suggests Obi-Wan chooses deliberate ambiguity, focusing on the present rather than dredging up Luke's heritage before its time. The trouble is, the ambiguity rubs against Leia's later memory of Padmé and Luke's eventual confrontation with the truth. Once again, memory in Star Wars bends to the needs of the story. Droids forget when it helps the narrative, remember when it drives a plot, and keep secrets when mystery matters more than continuity. This scene is emblematic of the saga's relationship with its own history. Droids are perfect devices for continuity, they see everything, survive everything, and never age. But to keep the story focused on human drama, their memories are muted. The contradiction frustrates law-minded fans but also underscores a larger theme. Truth in Star Wars is always partial, always filtered, always withheld until the right moment. And that sets up the next fracture, because if droids, creatures of record and data, cannot give a stable account, then what about holocrons, archives, and Jedi prophecy? What happens when the galaxy's repositories of knowledge themselves cannot be trusted? The next scene lies not in memory, but in the records the Jedi once swore were incorruptible. The Jedi prided themselves on knowledge. Their temple stood as both sanctuary and library, its archives a glowing labyrinth of stars and histories. In Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan consults that vast holomap and comes up against something unthinkable. Kamino is missing. He has the gravity data, the erased system, and the dead end in front of him. 𝒍𝒆𝒑, guardian of the archives, gives the chillingly complacent answer: if an item does not appear in our records, it does not exist. With that line, the Jedi reveal their most dangerous blind spot, not just a vulnerability to deception, but an institutional arrogance that mistakes record for reality. Canon fills in the gap. Only a Jedi could have erased the data, Yoda warns. The implication is clear: Count Dooku, still moving in shadows, excised the entry. The Sith understand what the Jedi do not, that records are power, and power can be altered. The Kamino deletion isn't a loose thread, it is the stitch that ties the Clone Wars together. Without that missing system, the Jedi cannot investigate Sifo Dyas properly, cannot trace Jango Fett's contract, cannot map the army's true origins. The very archive that should have guarded against manipulation becomes the vector of manipulation itself. This isn't an isolated case. The saga repeatedly shows records failing where intuition succeeds. In Revenge of the Sith, the Jedi rely on Senate intelligence to track the war, blind to the way Sidious directs both sides. In The Last Jedi, Luke explains that the ancient Jedi texts contain wisdom but not the whole truth. Rey senses this too, telling him she already understands what the books imply. Even holocrons, repositories of Force knowledge, can mislead or seduce. The Sith holocron in Star Wars Rebels whispers power at Ezra Bridger until it nearly consumes him. Time and again, the archive gives only part of the truth, and the part it omits is often lethal. Fan defenses argue that this isn't really a contradiction, but a theme. The Jedi trusted their records too much, mistaking data for clarity. The Force itself resists being bound in text. Clouded, everything is, Yoda admits. In that reading, the erasure of Kamino and the inadequacy of prophecy are not plot holes but deliberate commentary on the limits of institutions. Knowledge without humility becomes dogma. The Council believes their library is incorruptible, and that faith blinds them more effectively than any Sith power. Still, the scene grates. If a Jedi could erase Kamino so easily, why didn't anyone notice? If the Jedi truly believed archives were infallible, how did they fail to institute redundancies, backup copies, cross-checks, or even mundane astronomy to confirm stellar catalogs? This is the same order that commands fleets and negotiates treaties. Its ignorance of data hygiene is staggering. Fans patched this by invoking Sith infiltration, Dooku's influence, Sidious's manipulation of bureaucracy, even Force techniques that obscure more than eyes can see. Those explanations work, but they highlight a broader problem. If knowledge can be so easily doctored, how can anyone in this galaxy ever be sure of the truth? That question, lingering and unsettling, leads us onward. Because if records cannot be trusted, then what about orders issued across entire armies with catastrophic obedience? If archives can be rewritten, what of a clone's very mind? The next scene is not about missing data, but about hidden programming, the inhibitor chips and the order that turned loyal soldiers into executioners overnight. Few fractures in the saga strike as hard as the suddenness of Order 66. Across Revenge of the Sith, Jedi generals fight alongside their clones, trusting them with their lives. Then Sid Iou speaks 3 words, execute Order 66, and the trust shatters. Troopers who had bled with their commanders turn their rifles on them without hesitation. It plays with operatic cruelty, 1,000 friendships undone in an instant. But when you lean closer, the contradiction emerges. How can soldiers bred for loyalty, individuality, and camaraderie pivot to slaughter so easily? The prequels suggest conditioning. In Attack of the Clones, Lama Su tells Obi-Wan that the clones are engineered for greater docility and obedience. On its own, that's plausible. Soldiers bred in 𝒍𝒆𝒑 might obey dangerous orders without question. But the Clone Wars series complicates this with a darker revelation. Hidden in every clone's brain is an inhibitor chip. Ostensibly designed to curb aggression, the chip is really a fail-safe, hardwiring each clone to obey Order 66 when triggered. It isn't loyalty that drives them to turn, it's programming. The tragedy deepens because it robs them of agency. They are brothers forced to betray against their will. Fans divide over whether this resolves or worsens the contradiction. On one hand, the chip explains why the clones act in eerie unison, why even men like Cody, Rex, and Bly, who respect their Jedi, flip instantly. On the other, it undercuts the personal betrayal. If the clones are victims of programming, then the Order's fall isn't the product of misplaced trust, but of Sith engineering. The emotional sting dulls, because the clones are no longer culpable. That patch shifts the tragedy from treachery to manipulation. It works, but it leaves the moral weight hanging oddly between the Jedi, the clones, and the Sith. There's also a logistical seam. If Order 66 was embedded in every clone's mind, how did no Jedi ever sense it? They fight side by side for years, in close quarters, meditating and attuning to the Force. Shouldn't even Yoda, with his penetrating insight, have glimpsed the shadow? The Clone Wars addresses this. One trooper, 𝒑𝒑, discovers the chip after a malfunction causes a premature execution. He investigates, nearly exposes the plot, and is silenced under a cover story. The Jedi hear fragments but dismiss them, too distracted by the war. Once again, institutional blind spots allow Sidious's plan to hold. From a lore perspective, the inhibitor chips resolve many problems. They justify the clones' obedience without turning them into simple traitors. They set up Rex's refusal, Ahsoka's heartbreak, and later arcs in Rebels where survivors wrestle with guilt. But they create their own contradiction too. Why would Sid Iou allow an entire army of potential liabilities to survive for years before triggering the Order? The answer is necessity. He needed the Jedi to trust the clones first. The delay is what sells the trap. Ultimately, Order 66 embodies the saga's recurring theme, trust weaponized. The Jedi trust the archives and lose Kamino. They trust their visions, and Anakin falls. They trust their soldiers, and the soldiers become executioners. Each time, loyalty proves hollow because the system itself is compromised. And that carries us naturally into the next scene. If clones can be reprogrammed in an instant, then what of droids? We have seen R2 withhold truth, C-3PO's memory erased, archives deleted with a keystroke. In a galaxy where minds, organic or mechanical, can be rewritten, what does identity even mean? The next contradiction lies in the uneasy status of droids, sentient enough to suffer, but treated as property, their personhood both affirmed and denied across the saga. If clones reveal how fragile loyalty can be when identity is engineered, droids reveal something even more unsettling. The saga cannot decide whether machines are people or property. Across every era, droids speak, joke, feel fear, display loyalty, and even mourn. R2-D2 shrieks when starfighters explode, C-3PO frets with neurotic anxiety, and BB-8 tilts its dome like a pet begging for affection. K2SO in Rogue One delivers dry wit and ultimate sacrifice. L337 in Solo fights for droid rights, arguing openly that sentience deserves freedom. These aren't just tools, they are characters. And yet, in the galaxy at large, droids are treated like appliances, owned, wiped, scrapped, or sold at auction without the slightest acknowledgement of their autonomy. This contradiction is visible from the very beginning. In A New Hope, Uncle Owen purchases C-3PO and R2-D2 like spare parts. Later, the cantina in Mos Eisley throws them out with a curt, "We don't serve their kind here." The prejudice is overt, but rarely questioned. Droids fly ships, translate languages, even strategize in war, but they remain property, their memories reset whenever their usefulness runs dry. C-3PO himself undergoes at least 2 wipes in canon, one ordered by Bail Organa at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and another partial reset in The Rise of Skywalker. Each time, his identity is treated as expendable. Fans often point to memory wipes as the lore patch for why droids don't carry continuity. A protocol droid that remembers centuries of galactic history would disrupt the narrative. But the wipes also underscore the moral dissonance. If C-3PO's constant worrying and R2's steadfast loyalty are merely byproducts of programming, then their loss of memory is trivial. But if those quirks add up to personhood, then wiping them is closer to erasing a life. Expanded canon leans into this ambiguity. In the Clone Wars, droids banter, scheme, and even sacrifice themselves. L337 is perhaps the most radical. She sees herself as enslaved, fights for liberation, and ultimately becomes one with the Millennium Falcon's navigational computer. Her fate raises the question starkly. Did she gain freedom through integration, or did she lose herself entirely? Defenses range from practical to philosophical. Some argue that droid sentience is an illusion, a byproduct of advanced programming designed to mimic emotion. That would explain why no one grants them rights. They are machines, however charming. Others counter that Star Wars shows us too much individuality for that to hold. R2 disobeys orders when he believes he knows better. K2SO chooses to sacrifice himself. Even battle droids, ostensibly mindless, exhibit cowardice and humor in the middle of combat. If that isn't personality, what is? The contradiction lingers because the galaxy itself never answers. What makes this seem fascinating is that it mirrors the saga's larger struggle with personhood. Clones are bred for obedience, yet they build individuality through nicknames and tattoos. Jedi are raised to suppress attachment, yet their humanity bleeds through. Droids are programmed for tasks, yet they act as friends. In each case, institutions reduce beings to function, while the story restores them to character. That tension produces both the emotional heart of Star Wars and the philosophical cracks in its foundation. And it prepares us for the next contradiction, because if droids are denied rights despite clear sentience, then what does that say about the Jedi's treatment of their own initiates? If machines can show humanity but be denied freedom, what of children taken from their families and told their bonds are dangerous? The next scene turns from the mechanical to the mystical, from the erasure of memory chips to the suppression of human attachments in the Jedi Code itself. If droids are denied rights despite their obvious individuality, the Jedi mirror that contradiction in their treatment of initiates. From the moment children are brought into the temple, their bonds to family are severed. Attachment is framed as dangerous, a path to fear, jealousy, and ultimately the dark side. Yoda, Obi-Wan, even Mace Windu repeat the mantra, a Jedi must let go of all they fear to lose. The irony is stark, an order sworn to peace enforces emotional austerity so strict it breeds the very instability it seeks to prevent. We see this most clearly in Anakin. Taken from his mother at 9, older than most younglings, he carries that bond into Jedi life. The Council senses the danger but accepts him anyway, trusting the prophecy of the Chosen One. Yet their rigidity around attachment becomes a vice that tightens with every loss. His visions of Shmi, then Padmé, are not processed with guidance but suppressed with dogma. Train yourself to let go, Yoda tells him, as though grief could be willed away. It is no surprise that when Sidious offers an alternative, a way to preserve the life of the one he loves, Anakin breaks the code. His fall is less a rejection of Jedi values than a reaction to their inflexibility. Expanded canon reinforces how universal this rule was. In the Clone Wars, Jedi like Ki-Adi-Mundi are exceptions. He is allowed wives due to his species' low birth rate, but most are bound by the code. Obi-Wan himself admits, in one of the show's most poignant arcs, that he once loved Duchess Satine of Mandalore. He chose the Order instead, and Satine eventually died in his arms. The Order praises this sacrifice as discipline, but Obi-Wan's grief shows the cost. When you forbid attachment, you do not erase it, you bury it. And buried emotion finds its way back to the surface. Fans have wrestled with whether this is a plot hole or simply tragic design. Defenders argue that the Jedi Code was never meant to erase compassion, only to prevent obsession. Attachment is distinct from love in their philosophy. Selfless love is permitted, possessive love is dangerous. Luke himself embodies this nuance in the original trilogy. He loves his friends, even risks his mission for them, but ultimately does not dominate them. Anakin, by contrast, cannot distinguish love from control. In this reading, the code was wise, Anakin was flawed. But that defense weakens under scrutiny. The Jedi fail to teach nuance. To children like Anakin, the code feels absolute, love nothing, or lose everything. The Order's inability to translate doctrine into compassion is what makes Sidious so effective. He twists attachment into a weapon, convincing Anakin that only the dark side will protect those he loves. The Jedi's rigidity did not just fail to prevent the fall, it helped cause it. Here the saga echoes the contradictions we've seen before. Just as archives proved corruptible and visions proved misleading, the Jedi Code proves unsustainable. Each is meant to be a safeguard, each becomes a trap. And if attachment is forbidden, then the very bonds that redeem Anakin, his love for Luke, become an exception that breaks the rule. The code collapses under the weight of its own contradiction. Which leads us forward, because if the Jedi's philosophy is so brittle, how did Luke forge a path at all? His attachments are what save him, yet his attempt to rebuild the Jedi Order ends in ashes. The next scene asks whether the saga ever truly knew what a Jedi should be, and why the answer keeps shifting with each generation. If the prequels show us an order too rigid to survive, the sequels show us a master too uncertain to rebuild. Luke Skywalker, who once defied Yoda and Obi-Wan by embracing his attachments, becomes the man who nearly repeats their mistakes. His journey from redeemer of his father to failed teacher of his nephew is one of the saga's most contested arcs, and one of its most telling contradictions. At the end of Return of the Jedi, Luke stands in the Emperor's throne room, saber cast aside, declaring himself a Jedi like his father before him. It feels final, the Order reborn in compassion, balance restored by the refusal of hate. And yet, when we meet him in The Last Jedi, the optimism is gone. His students are dead, his temple burned, and his faith in the Jedi as an institution shattered. He believes the Order must end, that the Jedi's history is one of arrogance, failure, and unintended catastrophe. How do we reconcile the triumphant air of the original trilogy with the broken hermit of the sequels? Defenders argue that this is continuity at work. Luke never received complete training. He learned from Yoda and Obi-Wan, but his true education was improvised, rooted more in instinct than doctrine. When faced with the burden of rebuilding an entire order, he naturally fell into the same traps his predecessors did, teaching detachment, fearing darkness, and mistaking vision for destiny. His failure with Ben Solo echoes the Council's failure with Anakin. Far from a contradiction, this is a generational cycle. The Skywalkers are bound not by triumph but by repetition. And yet, the pacing makes it feel abrupt. Audiences saw Luke victorious in 1983 and broken by 2017, with little connective tissue on screen. Expanded canon tries to fill the gap. Novels like The Legends of Luke Skywalker depict him searching for relics, exploring forgotten temples, questioning what it means to be a Jedi. But those glimpses remain fragmented, leaving the films to bear the weight of the transformation. The result is jarring. Luke shifts from embodiment of hope to embodiment of disillusion, and the saga asks us to accept it without showing the slow erosion that made it inevitable. There's also the matter of philosophy. Luke rejects the Jedi legacy because he sees hypocrisy, an order that preached detachment but was destroyed by its own blindness, an order that claimed to guard peace but became generals in war. His critique is not wrong. The prequels themselves show the same flaws. But the contradiction arises in timing. If Luke could redeem Vader through compassion, why did he not extend the same patience to Ben? His moment of weakness, igniting his saber over his sleeping nephew, feels out of sync with the man who once cast his saber away in defiance of the Emperor. The sequels want to show a man humanized by failure, but in doing so, they risk undermining the integrity of his earlier choices. Fan interpretations soften this fracture. Some see Luke's disillusionment as the natural endpoint of his arc, a man who learns the danger of prophecy, who questions whether the Jedi's very framework is salvageable. Others frame it as tragedy, the galaxy's greatest redeemer undone by a single moment of doubt. Either way, his story fits the saga's recurring pattern. The institutions we trust most are the ones that fail most dramatically. And so we arrive at the deepest question. If Luke's vision of the Jedi falters, and the prophecy of the Chosen One collapses, what remains of destiny itself? If heroes rise only to repeat failures, if prophecies resolve only to be reopened, then perhaps the saga is not about final answers at all. Perhaps its contradictions are its truth, a galaxy forever caught between faith and doubt, triumph and relapse. Which leads naturally into our next scene, because if Luke's role as the Last Jedi is unstable, then what of Rey's role as the next? Can her journey resolve the saga's contradictions, or does she inherit them all? We've traced a long arc, from Anakin's nightmares that trapped him, to Leia's impossible memories, to archives that lied, clones that betrayed, droids that forgot, and Jedi who forbade the very bonds that made them human. Again and again, the story turns on the same paradox: trust given, then broken, knowledge believed, then revealed as incomplete, victories declared, then undone. Star Wars thrives on contradictions not because it intends them all, but because its mythic drive for drama often outruns the careful stitching of continuity. What emerges from these scenes is a portrait of fragility. Empires collapse too fast, prophecies resolve too easily, and legacies curdle into disillusionment. And yet, it is precisely this fragility that keeps the saga alive. Each generation inherits both triumph and failure, both the hope of balance and the certainty of relapse. If Anakin was the chosen one, Luke becomes the failed teacher, and Rey must confront what destiny even means. These aren't neat resolutions, they're living cycles. The contradictions, instead of killing the myth, extend it, each seem a new crack where story seeps in. And there's something else at work: affection. These flaws don't ruin Star Wars, they make it more compelling. They give us something to argue over, to reinterpret, to defend or deconstruct. They keep the galaxy far, far away feeling alive, not as a perfect chronicle but as a myth retold with every retelling. When Leia remembers too much, or R2 says too little, or Luke shifts too sharply from savior to exile, we lean forward. We debate. We care. And that caring is the real continuity, threading us, the audience, into the same cycle of hope and doubt as the characters themselves. So as we prepare to step into Rey's story, her inheritance of prophecy, her confrontation with Palpatine reborn, her claim to the Skywalker name, we should recognize what we're really examining: the final stage of the saga's pattern. Will Rey break the loop, or is she destined to repeat it? Is she the answer to the prophecy, or its latest reinterpretation? The films give us an ending, but whether it satisfies depends on how much contradiction we're willing to hold. And before we continue, a small note for you listening along: these videos take a while to make. Drop a like if you've enjoyed so far. It's the same rhythm as Star Wars itself: effort poured in, sustained by passion, carried forward by those who believe the story is worth telling. Next, then, we dive into Rey, the scavenger turned Jedi, the Palpatine turned Skywalker, and the final thread in a tapestry already fraying at the edges. Rey enters the saga as a blank slate. A scavenger on Jakku, she is introduced without lineage, without training, and without any place in the galaxy's legacy. For many fans, that anonymity was the point: anyone could rise, anyone could touch the Force, anyone could be the hero. In The Force Awakens, her mystery is not her bloodline but her strength. Why does this untrained girl resist Kylo Ren's probe, summon Anakin's lightsaber, and defeat him in combat? She feels like the democratization of destiny, the answer to the Skywalker saga's insularity. But in The Rise of Skywalker, that promise is rewritten. Rey is not no one, she is the granddaughter of Darth Sidious himself. Her power is explained not by will or training, but by blood. The contradiction is immediate. For decades, we were told the Force surrounds us, penetrates us, binds the galaxy together. Yoda taught Luke that size doesn't matter, lineage doesn't matter, only belief and discipline. Now the sequel trilogy tells us that Rey's significance is genetic. Her triumph is framed not as the rise of a nobody, but as the triumph over her own cursed heritage. Fan defenses are varied. Some argue that the Palpatine reveal fits the mythic structure of Star Wars. Anakin, born without a father, was the chosen one. Luke, the son of Vader, faced the darkness in his own blood. Rey continues that pattern: destiny through lineage, light against dark in generational form. Her claim to the Skywalker name at the end isn't erasure, but reclamation, choosing the family that raised her rather than the family that spawned her. From that angle, her story is consistent with the saga's obsession with legacy. Others see it differently. The Palpatine twist undermines the democratization that The Last Jedi seemed to promise. That film framed her as a nobody, powerful not because of who her parents were but because the Force flows wherever it wills. It suggested a breaking of cycles, a widening of myth. The Rise of Skywalker reverses that, locking Rey back into the dynastic framework. Fans argue this isn't just a contradiction, it's a betrayal of theme. Star Wars, they say, narrowed when it should have widened. Lore tries to patch the seam. Expanded material suggests that Sid IOUs had contingency plans, cloning projects, and offspring hidden across the galaxy. Rey's father was one of these shadows, a failed clone who sought anonymity. This makes Rey less a dynastic heir than a byproduct of Sith obsession. But that patch doesn't fully resolve the thematic dissonance. Was Rey powerful because she trained, or because she was born to a dynasty? Was she nobody, or was she always bound to the galaxy's greatest tyrant? The contradiction deepens when we recall the prophecy. If Anakin was the chosen one, ending the Sith by killing Palpatine, how is Sid IOUs alive to sire a bloodline? If balance was restored at Endor, how does Rey inherit imbalance at Exegol? The sequel trilogy offers closure but destabilizes everything before it. Rey's choice to take the Skywalker name is powerful emotionally but wobbly in logic. It leaves us asking, is destiny blood, or is destiny choice? And yet, in that unresolved question lies the saga's final heartbeat. Star Wars has always oscillated between determinism and agency, between prophecy and free will. Rey embodies both contradictions at once, born of Palpatine, choosing to be Skywalker. Perhaps that is the only way to end the saga, not by reconciling its contradictions, but by holding them in tension. Which brings us to our final scene, the last contradiction in this long journey. If Rey is Skywalker by choice, if the prophecy has been both fulfilled and rewritten, then what is Star Wars itself by the end? A closed myth, or an open cycle? A story resolved, or one destined to repeat forever? That is the paradox we must face in conclusion. And here we are, at the final knot in the tapestry. The Rise of Skywalker closes with Rey standing on Tatooine, burying Luke and Leia's sabers in the sand, and claiming the Skywalker name as her own. It's framed as a circle completed, the legacy of the twins preserved, the Skywalker line reborn through choice rather than blood. Yet even as the sun set on that moment, the contradictions we've followed across the saga refuse to settle. Is this truly an ending, or simply another turn in the cycle? The films insist it's closure. The Emperor is dead, his fleet destroyed, the Sith Eternal scattered. Rey, the granddaughter of Sid IOUs, chooses to be a Skywalker, symbolically healing the fracture between light and dark. But the cracks show almost immediately. If Palpatine survived Endor once, why not again? If the Sith Eternal could hide a fleet beneath Exegol, what prevents another hidden sect from waiting to rise? If balance was restored, why must it be restored again? The same questions that haunted the prophecy of the Chosen One now haunt its supposed successor. Fans offer defenses that are as varied as the saga itself. Some say the point is not permanence but renewal, that Star Wars is not about endings but about the endless vigilance required to hold the light. Others argue that the sequels collapse the myth into repetition, recycling Palpatine to raise the stakes rather than extending the story forward. Expanded canon leans toward the first interpretation. Novels and reference material suggest Rey will teach a new generation, one not bound by the strictures of the old Jedi Code nor chained to Sith dualism. If that is true, then the ending isn't final but transitional. Yet the dissonance remains. The saga began with Anakin Skywalker, born of prophecy. It ended with Rey Skywalker, adopting the name. In between, the galaxy rose and fell, empires collapsed and returned, prophecies were fulfilled and reopened. What ties it all together is not continuity of lore but continuity of theme, hope in the face of relapse, redemption in the face of despair, choice in the face of destiny. The contradictions aren't flaws so much as mirrors, reflecting how myth bends to fit each generation's needs. So when we ask if Star Wars truly ends, the honest answer is no. Its contradictions prevent finality. Every resolution sparks a new question. Every prophecy births another. Every ending leaves the door open to continuation. That is why the saga still matters, decades after its first crawl. It is not a closed chronicle, but an open myth, forever inconsistent, forever compelling. And that, perhaps, is the ultimate truth we've uncovered together. The seams and plot holes don't weaken Star Wars, they give it life. They keep it debated, reinterpreted, and reimagined. A perfect story ends. A flawed one endures. Two suns set on Tatooine, and two truths remain. The story is over, and it will never be over. And so, we close the circle. Over the course of this journey, we've uncovered the contradictions that lie at the heart of Star Wars. We've seen how prophecy both guides and deceives, how memory both preserves and distorts, how institutions, be they Jedi archives, clone armies, or galactic governments, crumble under the weight of their own blind spots. We've seen heroes redeemed too quickly, empires collapse too neatly, and legacies unravel only to be rewritten again. But what have we really learned? That the so-called plot holes of Star Wars are not just flaws, but reflections of what makes it endure. A perfect myth closes itself off, a fractured one invites us back again and again. Every inconsistency is an opening for debate, for reinterpretation, for imagination. The galaxy far, far away survives precisely because it cannot quite hold itself together. Its contradictions are its lifeblood. So if you've enjoyed this exploration, know that I've also created a Harry Potter version, an entire deep dive into the magical world's plot holes and paradoxes, that will pop up right here at the end of the video. If Star Wars was about cycles of hope and failure, Hogwarts is about rules that bend, break, and sometimes vanish altogether. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for caring enough about these stories to wrestle with their rough edges. That's the mark of true fandom, not blind praise, but love strong enough to question. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Who is your favorite character in Star Wars? Is it the steady wisdom of Yoda, the fiery complexity of Anakin, the unshakable compassion of Leia, or someone else entirely? Drop it in the comments, I'll be reading them all. Also let me know if I missed anything from the series. And until next time, may the Force be with you.